Family drama has a way of arriving quietly, slipping into a home long before the betrayal becomes obvious, and I learned that truth the day they tried to take my house from me. In that moment, surrounded by lies, secrets, and the kind of true-to-life deception that tears families apart, I felt the first shift toward a redemption none of them saw coming. She was still smiling when the knock came at my door. It wasn't a loud knock, not frantic or angry, just 3 heavy, deliberate taps that seemed to settle into the walls, as if the house itself was listening. The kind of knock that doesn't announce itself. It simply claims space. The kettle hissed behind me. The clock paused. Even the dust hanging in the afternoon light froze midair, as if unsure whether it should fall. Claire didn't move at first. Her fingers tightened around my wrist, not painfully, but with the careful pressure of someone who needs you still, needs you compliant. She flashed that bright, sweet smile she'd perfected over the years. The kind of smile that could soften a stranger, distract a clerk, excuse a lie. "Let's just finish this," she murmured, nudging the papers closer. "Once you sign, you won't have to worry about anything. Trust me, trust." It hung in the air like a trick candle, pretty, glowing, and impossible to keep lit without burning your fingers. The knock came again. Slower this time, more certain. A steady, patient blow that sent a small shiver through the floorboards. I rose from the table. Claire did not let go of my wrist immediately. There was a flicker in her eyes then. Something sharp, something rehearsed cracking out of place. I eased my hand from hers, gently, like peeling a leaf off glass. "I'll get it," I said. "I really don't think," she began. But the knock interrupted her, louder now, more insistent. I walked down the hallway toward the door I'd opened 1,000 times, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my fingertips and the faint hum of my own heartbeat in my ears. The danger wasn't on the other side of the door. It was sitting at my kitchen table. I knew that before I even turned the knob. When I opened the door, the world didn't explode. It rearranged itself. Slowly, quietly, like someone picking up pieces on a chessboard. 2 people stood on my front porch. The first, a woman in a navy blazer, her hair pulled back tight, her eyes sharp and assessing. She held a folder under her arm the way a surgeon might hold a scalpel. The second, my nephew, Daniel. He stood there in his crooked tie and good shirt, the same outfit he'd worn to funerals and court dates. His hair had thinned, but he still had that familiar smile, the one that had always been capable of charm, apology, and manipulation all at once. "Aunt Margaret," he said softly, "can we come in?" Behind them, a car idled with someone waiting inside, a silhouette watching, noting, judging. The woman stepped forward. "Mrs. Ellis? I'm Miss Carter with Adult Protective Services. We received a report of concerns about your ability to manage your affairs and live safely on your own." The word struck like a dull hammer. Adult Protective Services. Behind her, Daniel looked away. Behind me, in the kitchen, Claire sat with a pile of documents ready for my signature. And all at once, time bent. This was planned. Not hurried, not panicked. Orchestrated. I didn't move aside. Not yet. My hand stayed on the doorknob. My posture filled the doorway. "Who called you?" I asked. Miss Carter kept her voice smooth. "We'll discuss that inside. These situations can be emotionally charged, but our goal is to ensure your safety." Safety. Another word that can be weaponized by the wrong hands. Daniel finally met my eyes, and something in his gaze flickered. Regret? Shame? Or simply fear of being caught too soon? "Aunt Margaret," he said, swallowing hard, "we're just trying to help. You've been forgetful lately. leaving the stove on, misplacing things. You shouldn't have to deal with complicated paperwork. The kettle shrieked behind me in the kitchen, its thin wail slicing through the silence. It sounded like a warning, or a witness. I looked at him, really looked. You called them, I said. His face twitched. We only want what's best. You called them, I repeated. Miss Carter shifted, ready to step in. Claire's perfume drifted faintly from the kitchen. My house, my memories, my last piece of my husband, my whole life, stood between us like a living thing. Then I did something none of them expected. I stepped aside, opened the door, let them in. Truth is a storm that doesn't need thunder. It can arrive on quiet footsteps. And that day, as they filed into my kitchen, confident, rehearsed, certain of my weakness, they didn't realize they were walking into the beginning of their own unraveling. Because they weren't the only ones who'd prepared. I had made calls too. I had collected things, saved things, remembered things, and I knew something they didn't. Old is not the same as finished. They thought I would crumble. They thought I would sign. They thought the house, the symbol of my whole life with my husband, was already theirs. But to understand how that knock found its way to my door, and why betrayal arrived dressed as concern, you have to go back with me. Back to the morning it all truly started. The morning Claire first mentioned helping with the house. The morning I mistook her smile for love. Blank, underscore, blank. The memory of that morning is sharp, too sharp. Like a leaf pressed between book pages for years and only now rediscovered. Fragile, but still carrying the scent of the moment it was plucked. It had been a soft spring morning, the kind that made the whole world feel kind. My garden smelled of damp earth and rosemary. The sun spread across the kitchen tiles like a warm blanket. I stood by the counter, pinching the dead stems off my African violets, humming to myself, a habit my husband always teased me about. Then came the soft tapping on the glass door. Not a knock, never a knock. Claire tapped like she lived here, like doors were suggestions. "Aunt Margaret?" she called. "You home?" I dried my hands on a towel and let her in. She swept through the doorway in a cloud of perfume and pastel pink. A woman who never moved gently, only gracefully. Her hair was curled, her lipstick was perfect, and her eyes seemed to shine with a kindness that didn't quite reach her center. "You have a minute?" she asked. I smiled. "For you, of course, but in truth, if Claire came in person, she wanted something bigger than a cup of tea. She didn't sit, she wandered. Her fingers skimmed my countertops, my teacups, the framed photo of my husband in his fishing hat. She lifted a bill from the mail stack, glanced at it, then set it down exactly 1 inch to the left. The kind of movement that felt like a test. "I've been thinking," she said lightly. "Uh-oh," I teased. She didn't laugh. "You do so much around here." "Alone?" she added, tilting her head. "It isn't right. I'm fine." I turned back to the kettle. "You say that," she murmured. "But you're not young anymore." I paused. She pretended not to notice. She sat at the kitchen table now, folding her hands like she was about to deliver good news. "I talked to Daniel," she said, "and Mom, and we just think, maybe it's time you let us help." "With what?" I asked. "Everything," she said, too casually. "Bills, repairs, decisions, the house." The kettle began to rumble. The room seemed to shrink. She pushed forward. "We were thinking power of attorney. Just for the complicated things. Nothing major. Nothing major." The phrase slid across the table like an oily spill. I turned to face her. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm managing just fine." She leaned back, crossing her legs with a small sigh. "We love you, Aunt Margaret. We're worried. We just want what's best. Family." A word used like a rope. She stood, kissed my cheek, and added, Just think about it. For us, she left as quickly as she had arrived, leaving a faint trace of perfume and a door gently closing behind her. The house fell silent again. Only the kettle kept speaking. I didn't know it then, but that was the first time she imagined herself sitting where I sat. The first time she pictured my home without me in it. The first time I felt the air shift. Because betrayal doesn't always burst through the front door. Sometimes it arrived with a smile, a soft tap on the glass, and a promise that sounds like love. And that morning, the one I tried to forget, was the true beginning of everything that came next. I remember the day of the family meeting, the way I remember the first hard frost of winter. Not because of what happened, but because of what it signaled. A quiet shift, a tightening in the air, a cold breath slipping under the door before the storm fully arrives. It began with a phone call from my sister, Ruth. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year. Our conversations had dwindled the way relationships do when one person does all the reaching. She had always been the bold one, the dramatic one, the one who swore every setback was someone else's fault. Growing up, she'd strike matches just to watch them burn. Even as adults, she never lost her taste for heat. "Margaret," she said brightly, "I'm coming over. We all are." I frowned at the phone. All? Me, Claire, and Daniel. We need to talk. Those 4 words carry weight depending on who says them. When a doctor says them, you expect surgery. When a lawyer says them, you expect fees. When your own family says them, especially my family, you brace yourself. "About what?" I asked. "You know," she said, her voice sliding into a tone I remembered from childhood. A tone she used whenever she'd already made up her mind. "About how overwhelmed you've been." I stared at the kitchen wall, at the small crack in the paint near the window that my husband had always meant to fix. "I haven't been overwhelmed." "We'll talk when we get there," she said. "Put on some coffee." She hung up before I could answer. I stood there for several long moments, the phone silent in my hand, the room thick with something that felt like dust and warning. Outside, sunlight flickered through the willow tree, sending shifting shadows across the yard. I could feel my heart beat a little too loudly. By the time the knock came, I had set the table. Coffee. Pastries. The kind of spread you prepare for people you love or people you want to impress. I wasn't sure which group my family fell into that morning. Ruth came in first, sweeping into my kitchen with too much perfume and a smile that didn't convince either of us. Behind her came Claire, eyes bright, posture confident, the same posture she had when she wanted something. Daniel followed, hands in his pockets, drifting behind the 2 women as if he wasn't sure whose shadow he belonged to. "Aunt Margaret," he said softly. I hugged him. He stiffened, surprised. His shoulders were tight under my hands, tension wound so tight it hummed. Ruth placed her purse on the table with a neat little thump and sat down. "Let's get started." "Started with what?" I asked. She exhaled, giving me a look she used to give her students back when she taught elementary school. The patient, patronizing one. "We're worried about you." "I'm fine, Ruth." "You're alone," she said, drawing out the word, the way some people draw out pity. "You're living in a big house you can't manage. And you haven't been yourself." "What does that mean?" I asked. She gestured vaguely at me. "You look tired." I smiled tightly. "So do you." Claire stepped forward, placing her hand lightly on the back of my chair. "We're not attacking you, Aunt Margaret. We just want to help. You've carried everything alone since Uncle Henry passed. It's time someone else stepped up." The way she said someone else made my stomach twist. It wasn't an offer. It was a claim. "I didn't ask for help," I said. "You never do," Ruth replied. "That's the problem." Daniel cleared his throat. "Maybe we should just talk about the plan." That word made my skin prickle. The plan. A plan implies steps. Decisions. Discussions. and none of them had happened with me. "What plan?" I asked. Claire sat beside me now, too close. "To handle your finances, your paperwork, your decisions. The house," she added softly. "Everything. Everything. They wanted everything." "It's not safe for you to keep managing things alone," Ruth said. She folded her hands like a judge preparing a verdict. "You need support." "No," I said calmly. "What I need is honesty." The room stilled. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Claire blinked. "We're being honest." "You're being prepared," I said. "You rehearsed this." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Years of being a mother, a teacher, a wife had given me a tone that could cut without shouting. Ruth sat a little straighter. "That's unfair." I reached for my mug, steady as I could. "Is it?" Daniel shifted in his chair like a man sitting on wet paint. His eyes darted between his mother and Claire and the floor. He seemed smaller somehow. Not physically, emotionally. Like parts of him were folding inward. "Look," he finally said. "This is just about protecting you." I studied him. Protecting me from what? No one answered. But their silence said everything. They weren't protecting me, they were protecting themselves. I felt my pulse in my fingertips. The air thickened. I saw Claire glance at her phone, her thumb brushing the screen. A message popped up, quickly hidden, but not quick enough. I saw the sender, and in that moment, I understood the depth of this plan. It wasn't just Claire, it wasn't just my sister, it wasn't even just Daniel. It was all three of them. A small alliance built quietly over time. A family civil war with me at the center. "I'm not signing anything," I said. Ruth scoffed. "No one asked you to sign." "Yet," I murmured. Claire's smile cracked at the edges. I stood from the table slowly, deliberately. I felt years settle across my shoulders. But I stood taller than I had in a long time. They all watched me, waiting for something. For weakness, maybe. For fatigue. For fear. "I appreciate your concern," I said. "But I manage my life. My bills. My home. My decisions." Claire inhaled. "We just want." "No," I said firmly. "You want control." Daniel's breath caught. Ruth rolled her eyes. "You're overreacting." "No," I repeated quietly. "I'm noticing." The room cooled. Words hung like icicles. I walked to the stove and shut it off. The burner clicked as it cooled, the only sound in the room. "You should go," I said. Ruth pushed back her chair. "We will. But don't think this is over." "I don't," I said. "That's why you need to go." Claire's eyes flashed. Not guilt, not shame, but something sharper, something hungry. She reached for her purse and stood, smoothing her blouse like she needed it to hold her together. "We'll try again when you're calmer," she said. But I was calm. They left in a cluster of whispers and stiff shoulders, the door clicking shut behind them. Their car backed down the driveway. I watched from the window as they paused at the curb, three heads leaning in, talking, planning. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. Something had changed. The line had been drawn. Not by me, by them. And though I didn't know the full truth yet, I felt it moving toward me like a slow, deliberate storm. The first lie arrived on a Thursday morning. tucked neatly between the grocery circular and the electric bill. It waited on my doorstep like an unwanted gift, sealed in a polite envelope with my doctor's clinic logo stamped on the front. I almost ignored it. I almost slid it straight into the drawer with my receipts and coupons, telling myself I'd deal with it later. But something about the way my name was written, too neat, too controlled, made me pause. I opened it at the kitchen table, my glasses sliding a little down my nose. The letter inside was short and strangely formal. Mrs. Ellis, we are sorry to inform you that you missed your scheduled appointment on Tuesday. Please contact our office to reschedule. I frowned. Tuesday? I hadn't had an appointment on Tuesday. I hadn't had an appointment scheduled at all. I read the letter twice more, as if the words might rearrange into something sensible. They didn't. They sat on the page like little stones, cold and immovable. I picked up the phone and dialed the clinic. The receptionist answered cheerfully, unaware she was about to be pulled into a family storm. "This is Margaret Ellis," I said. "I received a letter saying I missed an appointment." Papers rustled on the other end. "Let me check. Yes, it says here you were scheduled for a cognitive assessment. Tuesday at 11. "A what?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "A cognitive assessment," she repeated, slow and careful, as if the phrase itself required delicacy. "It was requested by a family member on your behalf." I closed my eyes, feeling a cold thread wind through my spine. "Which family member?" She hesitated. "It just says your niece, Claire." Of course it was Claire. "Did she sign anything?" I asked. "Yes, she signed the consent form for you." My hand tightened around the receiver. "I didn't give her permission to do that." "Oh," the receptionist said, her voice faltering. "Well, she told us you asked her to. She said you've been forgetting appointments, and she wanted to make sure you were safe." I could hear my own breathing in the silence that followed, steady but heavy, like footsteps down an empty hallway. "Thank you," I said finally. "I'll take care of it." When I hung up, the house felt different, smaller, as if the walls had shifted inward. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the letter. The kettle clicked on automatically behind me, part of its morning cycle, and the sound startled me more than it should have. She had lied. Not exaggerated. Not misunderstood. Lied. And not just about an appointment, about my mind. The implications crawled over my skin. It wasn't just that they wanted control. It was that they needed evidence. Evidence that I couldn't be trusted with my own decisions, with my own life. A missed appointment would become a note in a file, a pattern, a justification. And suddenly, the family meeting made sense. They weren't checking in, they were collecting ammunition. I stood from the table slowly, as if afraid the floor might give way. I had been naive, not foolish, never foolish, but hopeful in a way that was no longer safe. The phone rang just as I laid the letter down. I knew who it was before I answered. "Aunt Margaret?" Claire's voice floated through the line, syrupy and smooth. "I was just thinking about you. I didn't say anything." "Did you get a letter today?" she asked lightly. "Yes," I said. "Good. I didn't want you to be surprised. You've been so stressed lately, and I figured the assessment might ease everyone's mind." "You scheduled it without asking me," she laughed. "Oh, I thought we talked about this." "No," I said. "We didn't." A pause. Small but telling. "Well," she said, shifting her tone, "you probably forgot. It happens." Those 3 words, "You probably forgot," landed like a blade laid softly across my throat. I took a slow breath. I didn't forget. Another pause. Longer this time. "Aunt Margaret, I'm doing what's best for you. You know that, right?" I didn't answer. She exhaled sharply, irritated. "Daniel and I are coming by later. We need to finalize the paperwork." Something inside me, something old and quiet, began to stir. a part of myself I'd forgotten about. The part that had negotiated with bankers after my husband died. The part that worked 2 jobs when the boys were young and the mortgage was heavy. The part that buried a child and kept breathing. "Don't come today," I said. Her tone changed in an instant. Hard, clipped. "We're coming. The call cut off." I stood in my kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the breathing of the house settling around me. My own heartbeat felt steady, not frantic. Something about their insistence sharpened me, made me more alert. They were making mistakes now, rushing, showing their hand. It meant they were afraid of something, or they were running out of time. I went to the drawer by the stove, the one filled with pens, rubber bands, and the things my husband used to call life's loose screws. But beneath the clutter was what I needed. The small, silver recorder he used during his years working on local council meetings. I had forgotten about it for a while. Or maybe I'd simply never needed it. Until now. I placed it on the counter and turned it on. The small light blinked red. I wasn't foolish. I wasn't confused. And I certainly wasn't done. When the doorbell rang an hour later, I already had the recorder tucked beneath a stack of mail, its light still blinking. Daniel stood on my porch, hands stuffed in his pockets, shoulders hunched. He looked older than his age, tired, worn. Behind him, Claire stepped forward with the confidence of someone who believed she controlled the outcome. "We need to talk," she said. I stepped back. "Come in." She walked straight for the kitchen table, the papers already in her hand. Daniel followed more slowly, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for something he'd lost. "Let's not make this hard," Claire began. "We're doing what's best." "What's best for who?" I asked. "For you," she said, but her eyes didn't match her words. "Look, once you sign the power of attorney, everything gets easier. We can manage the house, your finances, the repairs. You won't have to worry anymore." I sipped my tea, calm, very calm. "Who asked you to worry?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Aunt Margaret, we just think." "You think?" I interrupted gently. "Or someone told you what to think?" Claire's jaw tightened. "We talked about this already." "No," I said. "You talked. I listened." Her smile faltered. "You're being difficult." "No," I said softly. "I'm being aware." The kitchen air seemed to thicken. Even the light from the window felt dimmer. Claire spread the papers across the table. "Just sign, Aunt Margaret." Her tone changed then. Not soft, not sweet. Sharp. A blade with a lilt. "You need this. And if you won't sign willingly, well, there are other ways to prove you can't manage things." Daniel flinched. She didn't see it, but I did. "Other ways," I repeated calmly. "Like scheduling a doctor's appointment I never asked for?" Daniel's head snapped up. Claire froze. "What appointment?" Daniel asked. Claire answered too quickly. "Nothing. She's confused." "I spoke with the clinic," I said. I wasn't confused. The room inhaled as one. Daniel's face paled. "Claire, you said she asked for the evaluation." "I handled it," Claire snapped. "Someone had to." "By lying?" I asked. She squared her shoulders. "If that's what it takes to keep you safe." There it was, the justification every betrayer eventually uses. Not for greed, not for power, for your own good. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "What exactly are you protecting me from?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because the truth was simple. They weren't protecting me. They were protecting the house. I let the silence settle, thick and heavy. Then I spoke, calm as breath. "I'm not signing, and you need to leave." Claire's face contorted. Anger, then disbelief, then something almost wild. "You don't understand your situation." "I understand it perfectly," I said. "You need my signature, and you don't have it." Daniel whispered, "Claire, let's go." She turned on him. "Not until she sees reason." But I had already seen it. Every piece of it. Enough, I said quietly. Something in my tone made both of them pause. Claire gathered her purse, practically shaking with frustration. Daniel lingered by the door, eyes soft with regret. "We're only trying to help," he murmured. I looked at him, and for a moment, I saw the little boy he'd once been. Freckled and sweet, always losing his shoes, but never his smile. A part of him still lived in there somewhere. "I know," I said. "But you're helping the wrong people." He lowered his gaze. Claire tugged his arm. "Come on." The door closed behind them. The house sighed. I walked to the counter and picked up the recorder. The red light blinked steady. Strong. Everything they said was there. Every lie. Every threat. Every slip in their careful act. I turned it off and set it gently beside the letter from the clinic. Pieces. Pieces of the truth. Pieces of the storm. And I knew now that the storm was coming faster than I expected. I remember that night more vividly than I should. The kind of night where the house settles differently, as if it knows something you don't want to say aloud. I kept the lights low the way my husband used to when he needed to think. A quiet lamp in the corner, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old wall clock he insisted on keeping, even when it lost minutes every day. I sat at the table with the recorder beside me, the clinic letter folded in half, and a mug of tea that kept growing colder with every passing thought. I told myself I wasn't shaken, but the truth was I felt something stirring deep inside. Not fear, not anger, awareness. The kind that slips into your bones when the people you raised, the people you loved, begin to look at you like an opportunity instead of family. Outside, the willow branches swayed in a slow, restless way, tapping the window like fingers trying to get in. I wondered what my husband would have said, what he would have done. He never trusted Claire's mother. He used to say Ruth was born looking for shortcuts, and Claire had inherited the trait like a family heirloom. Maybe I should have taken that more seriously. But love makes you optimistic. Family makes you hopeful, sometimes dangerously so. It was nearly midnight when my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Aunt Margaret, can we talk tomorrow?" Alone? My heart tightened. Not painfully, more like someone had tied a knot in a ribbon and pulled it just enough. I typed back, "Of course." He didn't respond. The next morning arrived gray and heavy. The sky sagged low as if waiting for something to break. I spent the early hours dusting shelves, watering plants, giving my hands something to do while my mind churned. By the time I heard Daniel's car in the driveway, my pulse felt like a quiet drum beneath my skin. He stood on the porch with his shoulders hunched, his hands in the pockets of a jacket too thin for the weather. When he looked at me, his eyes didn't hold the same confidence Claire's did. They held something softer, something cracked. "Aunt Margaret," he said, and the words sounded tired. "Thanks for seeing me." I stepped aside. "Come in, sit." He sat at the kitchen table, the same chair Claire had occupied just the day before, her perfume still clinging faintly to the wood. Daniel stared at his hands, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. "I didn't know she scheduled the appointment," he said quietly. "She told me you asked for it." I believed him, not because his words were perfect, but because his voice was imperfect, uncertain, conflicted, almost ashamed. "Why didn't you ask me?" I asked gently. He lifted his eyes. "Because I didn't want to be in the middle." A sad smile tugged at my mouth. "Daniel, you've been in the middle since the day you were born." He huffed a small laugh. "Yeah, that's probably true." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It felt like a bridge being built plank by plank. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I should have come to you first." "You still can," I said. He swallowed. "There's something you need to know. Those words. Always a prelude to a truth no one wants to hear. I sat across from him, steady. I'm listening. He rubbed his palms together, like he needed friction to keep himself grounded. It's about the house. I nodded, but didn't speak. The house had become the sun everything else seemed to orbit around. I waited. He exhaled shakily. Claire and Mom, they're in trouble. I said nothing. He continued, voice low. A few years ago, Mom took out a loan. A big one. For her business. I almost smiled. Ruth's business has failed at least 10 times. He winced. Yeah, this one was bad. Worse than the others. And Claire? I asked. She co-signed, he said. And then they doubled down. They borrowed more, trying to save the first loan. I closed my eyes briefly. A dangerous spiral. A familiar one to anyone who has ever watched someone they love drown in their own decisions. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. He hesitated. Because the loan's past due. Way past due. And the bank is threatening legal action. They were supposed to refinance. They couldn't. I felt the pieces shifting, forming a shape I didn't like. And the house? I asked quietly. He winced again. They used the house for collateral. The kitchen fell silent. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. A bird chirped somewhere in the yard. But inside that quiet kitchen, something deep inside me froze. You used my house? My voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel's face crumpled. Not me, I swear, not me. Claire did it with Mom. They forged. He stopped himself, but not in time. They forged. The implication hung like smoke. They forged what? I asked. He pressed his palms to his eyes, like he could hide from the truth trying to claw its way out of him. Your signature, he whispered. On some of the documents. My breath left me all at once. A quiet rush. A sigh of disbelief and heartbreak woven tight together. They planned to take power of attorney. Daniel continued, voice breaking. So when you found out, they could say you didn't remember signing anything. They said it would be easy, that no one would question it. His eyes lifted to mine, red, tired, aching. I didn't know how far they'd go, he said. Not until yesterday. My hands trembled, not with fear, with a strange, rising calm. The kind that comes when the truth finally steps into the light, wearing no disguise. Daniel, I said softly, look at me. He did. I don't blame you for their decisions, but you need to understand something. This isn't just about money, or debt, or bad choices. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. This is about trust, I said. And trust doesn't grow back on its own. He lowered his gaze again. I know. A knock came at the door then. 3 short, clipped taps. Daniel flinched. That's them, he whispered. My stomach tightened, not in fear, but in a quiet, steady readiness. Like a woman standing in the middle of a storm she finally understands. I rose from the table, smoothing the front of my sweater. The house felt different now, not threatened, but alert, awake. The willow branches brushed against the window in a slow, rolling rhythm. Daniel stood too. Aunt Margaret, he said, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll help you. I'll do whatever you need. I touched his arm gently. We'll talk more soon. For now, let me handle this. He nodded and stepped back. As I walked toward the front door, I could hear their voices on the other side. Sharp whispers, impatient breaths, the rustle of papers. They thought they still had the upper hand. They thought the house was already slipping through my fingers. But the truth was no longer their weapon. It was mine. I opened the door. Claire stood there with a folder clutched tight in her hand. Ruth hovered behind her, eyes bright, with a rehearsed grief she didn't feel. And the moment I looked at them, a thought rose inside me with quiet clarity. They have no idea what's coming. I opened the door, knowing exactly what I would find on the other side. But it still struck me how rehearsed they looked standing there. Claire in her fitted blazer, hair pinned just so, folder tucked against her ribs like a shield. Ruth hovering behind her, eyes narrowed, lips pursed into the expression she'd worn my whole life whenever she believed she was on higher ground. Even their posture carried an air of triumph, as if some invisible referee had already declared them the winners. "Margaret," Ruth said, her voice dripping with shallow concern, "we need to talk." "We are talking," I answered. "You're on my porch. I'm listening." Claire stepped forward, her shoes tapping decisively on the wood. "May we come in?" I studied her face, the confidence, the certainty, the thinly veiled urgency beneath the surface. She needed inside. She needed control over the territory. People like Claire always fought better on ground they believed they owned. "No," I said calmly. Her eyebrows lifted. "No, that's what I said." Ruth scoffed. "Oh, Margaret, for heaven's sake, don't be dramatic." I gave her a long, slow look. "I'll let you know when I start being dramatic." Daniel stood behind me in the hallway, silent but present. I didn't turn to him, but I felt his supportive stillness, the way a lamp warms a corner without drawing attention to itself. He wouldn't interfere, not yet, but his presence was a shift, a subtle rearranging of the battlefield. Claire took a breath, composing herself the way she did whenever she needed to recover the upper hand. "All right," she said, "then we'll talk here." Her fingers tightened around the folder. I could see the faint tremor beneath the nails. "We need your signature," she said. "Today. Mom and I have gone over everything. This is the best course for you." "Which course is that?" I asked. "The power of attorney," she said firmly. "It's time." "No," I replied again, as gently as if refusing a second slice of pie. Her jaw flexed. "You don't understand what's happening. You cannot keep living in this house alone. You can't keep pretending everything is fine. And you can't keep pretending your intentions are noble," I said. Ruth's eyes flashed like a struck match. "How dare you? How dare you?" I said quietly. Then silence. A deep one. A telling one. The three of us stood there on the porch, the weight of decades thick in the air. I took a slow breath. "Ruth, why don't you tell me about the loan?" Her face drained of color so fast I almost felt bad for her. "Almost." Claire stiffened. "What loan?" I kept my gaze on Ruth. "The one you took out for your business. The one that failed." "It was a temporary setback," Ruth muttered, brushing an imaginary hair from her shoulder. "And the second loan?" I asked. "And the third?" Ruth opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I let the moment stretch, the truth hovering between us like dust caught in a beam of sunlight. "Daniel told you," she finally spat, turning on him like a snake that's been kicked. "I told you not to." "No," I said firmly. "He didn't betray you. You betrayed yourself." Claire clutched the folder harder, her knuckles whitening. "This is all irrelevant. We're talking about your well-being." "No," I said once more. "You're talking about your debts." Her voice sharpened. "That's a lie." "You forged my signature," I said softly, and her eyes went wide. "On documents I never saw. On agreements I never made." And then you scheduled a cognitive assessment to paint me as incompetent, so that when the truth surfaced, you could claim I'd forgotten. For a moment, the world stopped. The wind stilled. The willow branches paused. Even the air tightened. Ruth stepped forward. "Margaret, you're confused." "No," I said. "I am finally painfully clear." Claire's voice wavered, the first crack appearing in her armor. "You can't prove any of that." "I can," I said. "And I will." The recorder in my pocket felt heavy and certain. Its captured words like a heartbeat against my thigh. "You threatened me yesterday," I continued. "You said there were ways to prove I couldn't manage my life if I didn't sign willingly. And you told Daniel the same story. You told the clinic I had asked for the assessment. You lied. Repeatedly. And I recorded every word." Ruth gasped. Claire's lips parted, but no sound came out. I raised one eyebrow. "Did you forget I was married to a man who recorded every council meeting for 20 years? That pocket recorder has more life left in it than your entire plan." The shift was immediate. Claire's shoulders curled inward, the way a plant folds when the sun disappears. Ruth's eyes darted nervously toward the street, calculating exits, excuses, damage control. "We need to go," Claire whispered. "No," I said. "You're going to stay right there." My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the quiet gravity of a woman who had just stepped fully into her own strength. "You need to understand something," I said. "You don't get to bully me out of my home. You don't get to rewrite my life. And you don't get to weaponize my age against me." Claire swallowed hard. "Aunt Margaret." "No," I repeated. "Stop calling me that, when every move you've made has been toward erasing me." Ruth's chin trembled. We were desperate. "And I'm supposed to suffer for that?" I asked. No one answered. A car rolled down the street, its tires whispering along the pavement. Birds sang somewhere in the distance. Life continued outside our small storm. But inside the storm, something fundamental had shifted. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to leave. Right now, you're going to stop contacting the clinic. Stop filing paperwork. Stop lying." "And if we don't?" Claire whispered. "Then Adult Protective Services," I said calmly, "will hear the full story." Her head snapped up. "APS? They won't listen to." "They already did," I said. All color drained from her face. "And tomorrow," I added, "I will meet with a lawyer." Ruth's voice cracked. "Margaret, please." "No," I said softly. "We're done." Claire grabbed Ruth's arm. "Come on." They backed down the porch steps, retreating like soldiers who had just realized the hill they charged was already claimed by someone stronger. When their car pulled away, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was clean. Daniel remained in the doorway behind me, shoulders sagging with relief and guilt. "Aunt Margaret," he murmured. "I didn't know they forged anything, I swear." "I believe you," I said. He nodded, his eyes glossy. "What do you want me to do?" I looked at him, really looked, seeing not the scared man torn between loyalties, but the boy I once held on my lap while he cried over scraped knees and lost toys. "You stay out of their storm," I said. "You let them face what they created." "And you?" he asked. A slow breath left me, steady and certain. "I'm going to protect my home. And myself." He nodded again, this time with gratitude. After he left, I closed the door gently. The house exhaled with me, its old boards creaking like a friend shifting closer. For the first time in weeks, I felt something warm and solid in my chest. Not anger, not fear, not victory. Resolve. Whatever came next, I was ready. I woke the next morning with a feeling I hadn't had in years. It wasn't peace, Not yet. It was something sharper, something alive, like a heartbeat that had been sleeping in my chest, suddenly remembering what it was made for. The house felt different, too, as if it had shifted loyalties during the night. Every floorboard creaked with purpose. The light through the kitchen window felt clearer, less burdened. Even the teapot seemed to hum with a little more resolve as it warmed on the stove. I moved slowly, deliberately. I watered the plants, fed the stray cat that visited my porch, opened the curtains room by room. There was comfort in those routines. My husband used to say, the small things kept us upright when the big things tried to knock us down. And the big things were coming. I knew that now. By noon, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my late husband's old file box. I hadn't opened it in years. The metal latch clicked with a satisfying certainty. Inside were folders, receipts, old contracts, insurance documents, his entire life of careful, methodical planning. He had believed in keeping things organized, in case the world goes sideways, he used to joke. The world had indeed gone sideways, just not in the direction he predicted. I sifted through the papers, searching for something I couldn't name yet, something that would anchor me, something solid. And then, tucked in the back of the box, I found it, a thin manila envelope with a note in my husband's handwriting. For Margaret, if you ever need it. My breath caught in my chest. His handwriting looked the same as the last time I saw it. Firm, sure, the letters spaced just so. I ran my fingers over the ink for a moment before sliding the papers out. Inside were copies of the original deed to the house, our mortgage filings, signatures witnessed by the bank, and a handwritten list of every update, renovation, and repair we'd made over the decades. My husband had cataloged everything. It was as though he knew one day this house would become a battleground. I pressed the papers flat against the table, a quiet, grateful warmth blooming in my chest. I wasn't alone in this house, not really. His steady, practical mind had left me a trail of breadcrumbs through the darkness. A sharp knock snapped the moment in half. Not gentle, not polite. A firm, businesslike pounding that rattled the glass in the door. 3 strikes, then a pause. 3 more. The kind of knock that arrives with an agenda. Adult Protective Services. I knew before I even reached the hallway. My hand trembled only slightly as I opened the door. Miss Carter stood on the porch again, her blazer crisp, her expression unreadable. Behind her was another woman, younger, holding a clipboard against her chest. Their presence was a cold draft pushing into the warmth of my home. "Mrs. Ellis?" Miss Carter said. "May we come in?" I hesitated, not out of fear, out of calculation. Then I stepped back. Of course. They entered with the efficiency of people who had practiced this routine many times. The younger woman glanced around the living room, scanning everything as if taking mental photographs. The house, usually so welcoming, felt suddenly like a patient being evaluated under fluorescent light. "We need to follow up on yesterday's concerns," Miss Carter said. "We received a second call this morning." My stomach tightened. "From whom?" "We can't disclose that," she said. I almost smiled. I can guess. She didn't deny it. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." "And check the home for safety hazards," the younger woman added, stepping toward the hallway. "Stop," I said. She did. Immediately. Something in my tone carried weight. Years of teaching, mothering, caregiving. Years of being the anchor in every room I entered. "You may speak with me," I said. "You may review paperwork. But you do not search my home without cause." Miss Carter studied me. Her gaze was sharp, probing for cracks. "We need to determine if you can safely remain here alone." "I can," I said. "And I have evidence to support that. Evidence I'd like to show you." "Evidence?" she repeated, guarded. I motioned toward the kitchen table. The manila envelope lay open, the deed and files neatly arranged. These are my documents, original records. My late husband kept everything organized. You'll find every signature notarized, every detail in order." Ms. Carter stepped forward. The younger woman followed, peering over her shoulder. I watched their eyes move over the papers, slowly at first, then with focused attention. The signatures matched perfectly. The dates lined up. The property records were impeccable. My husband's handwriting had a way of instilling trust even after all these years. "These are in excellent condition," Ms. Carter said, impressed despite herself. "Yes," I said, "because I am capable of managing them." She looked at me then. Really looked. And something shifted in her expression. A subtle loosening, a flicker of doubt about the anonymous complaint. "And one more thing," I added. I reached into the drawer and pulled out the recorder. That tiny silver device suddenly felt as powerful as a spotlight on a dark stage. Miss Carter straightened. "What is that?" "A recording," I said, placing it on the table. "From yesterday. I'd like you to listen." The younger woman exchanged a glance with her supervisor. "Ma'am, you can either listen," I said gently, "or I can bring it to a lawyer tomorrow." Miss Carter paused, then nodded. "Play it." I pressed the button. Claire's voice filled the kitchen, smooth, sweet, and dripping with false concern. "You need to sign, Aunt Margaret, and if you won't, well, there are other ways to prove you can't manage things." Her tone sharpened through the tiny speaker, too slick and too practiced. "We already scheduled the assessment. The clinic will back us up. You don't need to understand everything we're doing. You just need to let us." The young worker's eyes widened. Miss Carter's lips tightened into a thin line. Then came Daniel's faint voice in the background. "She didn't ask for any assessment, Claire. You told me she did." And Claire again, cold, impatient. "Don't worry about the details. She won't remember any of this anyway." When the recording ended, the room fell into a silence so thick it could have been scooped with a spoon. Miss Carter folded her arms. "So they filed the concern?" "Yes." "And they insisted you required a cognitive evaluation?" "Yes." "And they pressured you to sign legal documents?" "That's correct." "And they lied about your memory?" "Yes." She drew a slow breath. "I need to apologize, Mrs. Ellis." I felt my throat tighten, not with tears, but with a deep, quiet relief. "We take these cases seriously," she said, "but we also take manipulation seriously. And this appears to be a deliberate attempt to misrepresent your health." The younger woman nodded, her voice soft. "We can see you're not confused at all." "No," I said, "I'm not." Miss Carter closed the folder firmly. "We'll file a report noting that you are fully competent, and that the previous concern appears unfounded and potentially malicious. Do you want us to pursue further action?" I exhaled slowly, considering. "No," I said finally. "Not yet." Her eyebrows rose, surprised. "Not yet?" I nodded. "There's more I need to understand first." She gathered her things. "You're stronger than most, Mrs. Ellis." I smiled faintly. "I've had practice." They left the house quietly, their footsteps marking a shift in the entire trajectory of what my family thought they were building. I watched them drive away before closing the door and leaning against it, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me like a heavy blanket. The truth was surfacing. The lies were cracking. And the ground beneath their plan was starting to crumble. But the soap opera wasn't over. It was barely beginning. Because as soon as I turned from the door, I saw something on the floor. An envelope slipped through the mail slot, lying on the rug like a waiting snake. My name written in sharp, hurried strokes. No return address. I picked it up, my heartbeat sharp as a drum. Whatever was inside, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The envelope felt too light in my hand, the way a threat sometimes feels light before it lands. I turned it over once, twice, listening to the faint whisper of paper inside. No return address, no markings. Just my name, written in a rushed, uneven scrawl that didn't match Claire's neat penmanship or Ruth's dramatic loops. For a moment, I wondered if it was Daniel. A warning, maybe. An apology. A plea. But no. Daniel's handwriting had always been small and tidy, every letter shaped as if afraid to take up too much space. Whoever wrote this had been in a hurry. Or angry. Or both. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table, the house silent around me. It's a strange thing how silence can make the air feel heavier, like the walls themselves are holding their breath. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper torn from a spiral notebook. Rough edges. Blue lines. The handwriting slanted hard to the right. I read the first sentence twice, because it didn't make sense the first time. You need to check the property records. My stomach tightened. The next line was worse. The house is already in foreclosure. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Not literally, but in the way your mind shifts when the ground you trusted suddenly proves it was never solid. No signature, no explanation. Just those two sentences, written like a confession that someone was afraid to speak aloud. I read it again, and again, and again, until the words blurred. Foreclosure. My name on the deed was supposed to protect me. My husband's meticulous records were supposed to protect me. But foreclosure didn't happen by mistake. It didn't happen overnight. It happened when payments stopped, or when someone took out a loan against the house. A loan with forged signatures. A loan that had defaulted. The room seemed darker now, as if the news had pulled the sun through the window by its roots. My pulse thudded in my ears, slow and heavy. I forced myself to breathe, to think, to stay in my body. Who sent this? Not Claire. She believed she still controlled the narrative. Not Ruth. She would never warn me. She'd rather watch the world burn and call it warmth, which meant someone else was involved. Someone who knew the truth. Someone who had access to the documents. Someone scared. The phone rang. I nearly jumped. The sound knifed through the quiet and made my heartbeat skitter. I reached for the receiver, steadier than I felt. Hello? At first, nothing. A faint breath. A distant hum. Then, Aunt Margaret? Daniel's voice cracked on the line, thin and frayed. Daniel, I said softly. Are you all right? He inhaled shakily. No, I'm not. What's going on? He paused, then whispered, I need to tell you something, but I can't say it on the phone. Can I come over? My fingers tightened around the receiver. Yes, come now. He hung up. I stood there, staring at the envelope on the table, feeling the truth pulsing beneath its thin paper shell. The house was in foreclosure. That meant the situation was already far worse than I had imagined. It meant they weren't simply pressuring me into signing documents. They were racing against a financial clock. It meant the walls around me, the ones my husband and I painted with our own hands, might already belong to someone else. Minutes passed like dripping water. Slow. Torturous. I kept pacing from the kitchen to the living room, my footsteps syncing with the pounding of my pulse. When Daniel arrived, he didn't park neatly in the driveway like he usually did. He pulled up crooked, left the engine running, and rushed to the porch with his jacket thrown over his arm as if he'd left in a hurry. His face was pale. Too pale. His eyes darted everywhere but mine, as though afraid the truth might leap out of the shadows. Come inside, I said gently. He stepped in and shut the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment like he needed it to hold him up. Daniel, I said, what's wrong? He swallowed so hard, his Adam's apple bobbed visibly. I didn't know about the second loan. I held up the envelope. What second loan? He stared at it, horror blooming across his face. They told you. Someone told me. I corrected. Not them. He raked a hand through his hair, pacing once around the room like a man circling his own regret. Oh God, Aunt Margaret. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Daniel, I said gently, sit. He sank into the armchair across from me, the same chair my husband used to favor. For a moment, Daniel looked like a child again, lost, overwhelmed, clinging to the edges of a world too big. I need you to tell me everything, I said. No more protecting your mother, no more covering for Claire, no more silence. He nodded, eyes glassy. All right. Start with the truth, he inhaled sharply. The house isn't just collateral. Mom and Claire, they refinanced it twice. They forged your name both times. My stomach dropped, a slow sinking descent. And when they still couldn't make payments, he continued, they applied for another loan, a high-interest one. My chest tightened. A predatory loan? Yes, and they used the house again. Yes. How far behind are they? I asked. His voice broke. Months. The room tilted. Not literally, but in that deep internal way when the future you imagined collapses in on itself. I didn't know, Daniel whispered. I didn't know how bad it was. They kept saying they'd fix it before you found out, that you wouldn't understand, that they'd protect you from the stress. But it wasn't protection. It was desperation. They kept digging the hole deeper. And now, he shook his head, burying his face in his hands. And now the house is slipping, he whispered, and they're trying to take control before you learn the truth. I exhaled, slow and steady, even though my heart felt like it was beating against cracked ribs. Why didn't they tell me? I whispered. Daniel lifted his head. Because they needed you to look incompetent. If they could prove you were losing your mind, they could sell the house without your consent. Claim it was for your care. For your safety. They thought they could make it look compassionate. Compassion. What a bitter word when wielded by cruel hands. And you? I asked softly. What did you want? His voice broke. I didn't want to hurt you. I just didn't know how to stop them. I nodded slowly. I believed him, not because his story was perfect, but because his guilt was too heavy to fake. You did the right thing coming here, I said. But I should have come sooner, he replied. Maybe, I said. But you're here now. He wiped his eyes with the back of his palm. Aunt Margaret, he whispered, I think they're planning something else. Something bigger, Claire said. His voice trembled. She said if you didn't give them what they needed, they'd make sure you did. I felt the cold slide down my spine. Daniel, I said quietly, what does that mean? I don't know, he whispered, but they're not finished. A long silence settled over the room. Then he added, barely audible, and I think they're watching you. A chill crept into my bones, slow and steady, rooted deep. I looked toward the window, the yard, the street beyond, and for the first time since this whole thing began, I felt eyes on me. This wasn't just betrayal now. It was war, not the kind with shouting and broken plates, not the kind my sister always seemed to crave. This was the quiet kind, the kind fought in paperwork and whispers and little shifts in power that most people never notice until something important is already gone. I stood there in my living room, the last words still echoing in my mind, and looked toward the window. The yard looked ordinary. The willow moved in the wind the way it always did. The bird feeder swung gently. Somewhere down the block a dog barked. It all looked the same, but I felt watched. It is a strange feeling, knowing you are the subject of someone else's plan. You feel it in the back of your neck, in the way your shoulders sit just a little higher, in the way your eyes linger too long on places where no one is standing. I moved to the window and parted the curtain with 2 fingers. A gray sedan sat across the street. It could have belonged to anyone, I told myself. This was a residential neighborhood. People visited. People parked. People existed. But I had lived here too long not to know which cars belonged and which ones did not. That one did not. It was too clean. No dents, no bumper sticker, no child's toy on the back seat. Just a blank, quiet car with windows dark enough that I could not see inside. The kind of car people use when they want to look like nothing at all. I watched it. It sat without moving. No one got out. No one lit a cigarette. No one fiddled with the mirror. It just existed, heavy and present. I let the curtain fall back into place. I could have called Daniel. I could have called the police. I could have marched outside and rapped on the window like a foolish woman in a bad movie. But I did none of those things. Instead, I went into the kitchen and put the kettle on. It sounds ridiculous, I know. But sometimes the smallest act of normal life becomes its own kind of defiance. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me panic. Not yet. The water boiled. I made tea. I set the cup on the table beside the recorder, the anonymous foreclosure letter, and the neat pile of documents my husband had left me. The evidence of my life and their lies all sat together, crowding my small kitchen table. I took a sip. My hands were steady. Then I went back to the front window. The gray sedan was still there. I stared at it for a full 30 seconds, then lifted my hand and waved. Just a small, slow wave, as if greeting a neighbor. The car did not move. No window rolled down. Nothing responded. But about a minute later, its engine coughed to life. It pulled away from the curb and drove down the street without hurrying, without rushing, without any sign of guilt. Just a car leaving. I watched until it turned the corner and disappeared. I did not feel safer, only clearer. They were not guessing anymore. They were checking, measuring, watching to see how I moved, how I reacted, whether age would make me crumble under pressure. Old is not the same as fragile. The rest of the afternoon passed with a strange kind of heaviness. I checked the doors twice. I checked the windows 3 times. I told myself I was being careful rather than afraid. It felt truer that way. By evening, the sky had turned that dull iron color that makes everything look flatter. I made myself a simple dinner, ate half of it, and could not bring myself to swallow the rest. I washed the dishes, stacked them neatly, and left the kitchen light on as I moved through the house, turning off all the others. I liked the house mostly dark. It made the one lit room feel anchored. It was nearly 9 when the phone rang. The sound cut through the quiet like a knife. I stared at it for a second longer than I should have before picking up. Hello? No one answered. Just breathing. Not ragged. Not hurried. Slow. Controlled. Too close to the receiver. Who is this? I asked. The line crackled softly. We see you, a woman's voice whispered. Then the call disconnected. I held the receiver to my ear for a moment longer, listening to the empty hum of the dead line. Then I set it down and pressed my palm flat to the kitchen counter. They wanted to rattle me. They wanted me to pace and wring my hands and slip, the way Claire had promised I eventually would. They wanted me to do their work for them. I took 3 slow breaths instead. After the third one, I walked back to the hallway and opened the small cabinet where we kept extra light bulbs and candles and the heavy old flashlight my husband used to carry in the glove compartment. I checked the batteries. The light clicked on strong and bright. Good. I walked through the house, room by room, checking every latch. The front door. The back door. The windows. The small side door by the laundry room that we never used but always kept locked. Everything was secure. I stopped at the guest bedroom. The door was half open. I always kept that door closed. There was no reason to go in there unless someone stayed over, and no one had done that in a long time. I pushed it open with the back of my hand. The room was still, the bed made, the curtains drawn. Nothing looked out of place at first. But the air felt different, warmer, like someone had stood in there for a while. I moved to the window and touched the latch. It was turned, but not fully engaged. Just a little off-center, just enough that a careful hand could slip it open without much effort. I closed it firmly and slid the lock with a quiet, decisive click. Then I stepped back and stood in the middle of the room, listening. Old houses have their own language, creaks, sighs, the distant hum of pipes. I knew them all. I knew what the house sounded like when it was settling, and what it sounded like when it was disturbed. Right then, it sounded like it was listening with me. "You're all right," I told myself softly. "You are in your home. You are not a guest here. You are not a prisoner. You are the owner." Saying it out loud helped more than I expected. Back in the kitchen, the phone flashed with a new voicemail. I pressed the button on the machine and leaned on the counter as it played. It was Claire. "Aunt Margaret," she began, her voice thick with false concern. "I heard APS came again. We're only making these calls because we care. You know that, right? If you keep fighting us, you are only making this harder on yourself." I closed my eyes. Her voice sharpened. "You cannot win this. You are not thinking clearly. People will believe us before they believe you. Please do the smart thing. Sign the papers. Let us handle everything before it is too late." She ended the call without goodbye. I erased the message. Not because it did not matter, but because I already had what I needed. Her threats on the recorder, her lies on file, her words in my memory. It was late by the time I finally went to bed. I did not sleep much. My body rested, but my mind walked circles. Around the house. Around the past. Around my husband's face as he stood in the doorway the first day we moved in, grinning like a boy, even though his hair was already going gray. "We will be old here," he had said. I turned on my side and looked at the doorway now, an old woman alone in the same frame, and whispered into the darkness, "But we will not be pushed out." At some point, between wakefulness and dream, I heard a car engine outside. Not roaring, idling. The low, steady hum of a vehicle sitting just beyond the window. I stayed very still, listening. After a minute, a door shut softly. Footsteps on the sidewalk. Slow, measured. They stopped. I lay there, counting my own breaths, feeling every inch of my body. Then the footsteps retreated. The car engine revved. The sound faded into the distance. I did not move until the silence had settled again, deep and honest. By morning, my body felt like it had been carrying a basket of rocks all night, but my mind felt clearer. War or not, I still had things to do. After breakfast, I took out my address book, the same one I had used for years, pages soft from turning. I flipped through until I found the name I was looking for. Patrick Doyle. My husband's old friend, retired lawyer, the man who had helped us close on the house all those years ago, sitting at our kitchen table with coffee and a stack of documents. I dialed the number with slow, careful fingers. He answered on the third ring. His voice was older, rougher, but still familiar, like a song I had not heard in years. Doyle speaking. "Patrick," I said. "It is Margaret Ellis." There was a pause, then warmth. "Margaret. Well, that is a name I have not heard in too long. How are you?" "I have been better," I said honestly, "and I think I need a favor." He listened as I told him the short version. Not all the emotions, not every small betrayal, just the facts. The forged loans, the power of attorney papers, the APS calls, the foreclosure warning, the recorder, the car outside. When I finished, The line was quiet for a long moment. "Do you have proof?" he asked finally. "Yes." "Then you do not need a favor," he said. "You need representation." He offered to come by the next afternoon. I thanked him and wrote the time on a scrap of paper, though I knew I would not forget. After I hung up, I felt something new in the air. Not safety, not yet. Structure, like the first wooden frame going up on an empty lot. I was dialing Daniel to tell him when I heard the soft thump at the back door. Not a knock. Something dropping. I set the phone down and walked to the kitchen. Through the small window in the door, I could see a cardboard box on the porch, no bigger than a paperback book, tied with plain string. Every nerve in me tightened. I opened the door and picked it up. It was light in my hands, almost weightless. There was a note taped to the top. "You deserve to know what they did." No signature. My heart thudded once, hard. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a small flash drive. I stood there in my kitchen, the box open in my hands, and felt the shape of the story tilt again. War was one thing. But this? This was someone inside their camp, passing me ammunition, someone who wanted the truth to land in the middle of all of us, and see who was still standing when the dust cleared. I closed my fingers around the flash drive. "All right," I said quietly, to myself, to my husband's memory, to the house that had sheltered everything I had ever loved. "Let us see exactly what you did." I did not sit right away. I stood there in the soft hum of the kitchen, holding the flash drive like a piece of cold bone. Outside, the afternoon had thickened into that kind of gray dusk that makes everything look a step removed from reality. The porch light flickered on by itself, old wiring, spilling a pale triangle of light across the steps. I closed my fingers around the drive and walked to the living room. My laptop sat on the small desk by the window, the same place my husband used to do our taxes every year with coffee and peanut brittle. The screen lit up slow, its boot-up chime sounding louder than it should in a quiet house. I slid the flash drive into the port. A new folder appeared at once. Just one word. Just one name. Claire. My breath stilled in my throat for a moment. Not in shock, but in recognition. Of course she'd be the center of whatever this was. Of course she would speak in the room where she thought no one was listening. I clicked the folder. Inside, one video file. Time-stamped 3 nights earlier. I clicked play. The screen brightened, showing a dim kitchen, Ruth's kitchen, with the sunflower curtains she'd hung 20 years ago and never once washed. Claire sat at the table, her hair pulled back, her face tired in a way I'd never seen. She wasn't wearing makeup. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't performing. She was afraid. Across from her sat a man I did not know. Suit, neatly pressed, slicked back hair, a jaw that suggested expensive dental work, and a nature that did not believe in no more. He tapped a pen on the table, impatient. "You said she'd sign," the man said. Not angry, annoyed, like a customer whose order arrived slightly wrong. Claire rubbed her forehead. "We're working on it." "Working on it?" he repeated. "You told us the house would be secured by now. Us, not him. Them." I leaned closer to the screen. Ruth paced behind them, her hands twisting in her sleeves. "She's stubborn, always has been. But once APS steps in..." The man cut her off with a laugh so soft it chilled the room through the screen. "APS?" He leaned back. "Do you think they will hand you everything on a silver platter because you file a few calls and pretend she's slipping? They have protocols, documentation, evidence, real evidence." "That's why we're trying," Claire snapped. Not at him, but at herself. A woman under pressure, a woman caught. We can get her to sign over the power of attorney, once we have control. "Once you have control," the man repeated, tapping the pen harder. "I get the deed." Ruth froze. "You said we'd get a portion." "After I sell it," he corrected. "After I recoup what you owe. You're already 3 years behind. You should be grateful. I've been patient." Claire's head dropped into her hands. This wasn't about the loans. This wasn't about the debts. This was about a man who owned them, and everything they had promised him. He leaned forward, his voice a quiet blade. "If Margaret refuses to sign, the courts could tie this up for months, maybe years. And I am out of patience," Ruth whispered. "We know." He pointed the pen at Claire. "So you make her sign." "I'm trying," Claire repeated, voice cracking. "You don't understand. She isn't confused. She isn't frail. She's sharp. Too sharp. So make her look otherwise." The room seemed to go still. "Make her look otherwise." Claire didn't respond. She only stared at the table, her fingers clutching the edges. The man stood, smoothing his suit jacket. "I will give you 1 month. After that, I step in. And I don't care who gets crushed in the process." He walked out of frame. A door slammed. The video ended. I sat there for a long moment, the laptop's glow flickering across my hands. The house felt different, colder, heavier, more sentient. As if it understood that someone had spoken of its destruction so casually. I clicked the file closed. The truth was bigger than I thought, and the danger was no longer imagined. I pulled the flash drive free and slid it into my sweater pocket, feeling its small, sharp edges against my ribs. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing against the house with a low, restless sigh. I stood, turned off the laptop, and walked toward the kitchen just as the porch motion light winked on again. That wasn't right. It rarely stayed on twice. I approached the door and looked through the small window. A silhouette moved across the yard. Tall, thin, wearing something dark. Not running, not sneaking, just pacing, watching the windows, watching the house. I stayed still, absolutely still, like the house itself had stopped breathing with me. The figure paused under the willow tree, head tilted toward the window where I stood, hidden by shadow. They lingered a moment, too long, then slowly walked out of view and down the side of the house. My pulse quickened, once, twice, but held steady. A few seconds later, the side gate clicked open, then shut. Footsteps faded. I waited another full minute before I moved. Not panic, not fear. Strategy. Eventually, I locked the door, turned out the kitchen light, and stepped into the hallway, feeling the old boards shift beneath my feet like familiar companions. When I reached the bedroom, I pulled open my nightstand drawer and took out the small metal box my husband kept for just in case. Inside was a heavy flashlight and a short pry bar. House tools, nothing more, but they felt grounding in my hand. I placed the flashlight beside the bed, and the pry bar beneath it. Sleep did not come easily, but when it arrived, it was deep and dreamless. Morning brought a pale, strained light, and the sound of car tires crunching on gravel. I pushed back the curtain and saw Patrick Doyle stepping carefully up the walkway, carrying a leather briefcase older than half the people I knew. He knocked once. Gentle. Respectful. "A moment," I called, straightening the collar of my sweater. When I opened the door, his eyes softened. "Margaret," he said with the warmth of years. "You look well." "I'm standing," I replied. "Good enough," he said with a small smile. We sat in the living room, the morning sunlight falling across his notebook. "Tell me everything," he said. And I did. Every detail, every lie, every whisper, every threat, every moment that had led me here. When I finished, he remained very still. "Show me the evidence." I gave him the foreclosure letter, the recorder, and finally, heart steady, the flash drive. He watched the video in silence, his jaw hardening slightly with each passing minute. When it ended, he closed the laptop and exhaled slowly. "You were right to call me," he said. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Worse than you think," he replied. "This man, whoever he is, has no legal claim, but he has leverage. And people with leverage do stupid things when they're cornered." "And Claire?" I asked. "She is complicit, yes, but she's also desperate." "Desperate people are unpredictable, but they're also sloppy." I nodded. "And Ruth?" He hesitated. "Ruth will follow whoever promises her the quickest way out of trouble. She always has." He folded his hands, leaning forward. "You're in danger," he said gently. "Not physically, not yet, but legally and financially. They want the house. He wants the deed. And your family. They're the weakest link he has to get it." "I know." He studied me carefully. "So the question becomes, what do you want to do?" I took a slow breath. "I want to keep my home." He nodded once, with quiet conviction. "Then we begin today." As he packed his briefcase, something white caught my eye at the edge of the front door, the corner of an envelope sticking through the mail slot. Patrick saw it too. "Expecting anything?" "No." I stood and retrieved it. No return address. My name written in the same rushed handwriting as the foreclosure warning. Inside was a single sheet of paper, torn like the last one. 4 words this time. "He's losing patience." Patrick's eyes narrowed. "He?" I folded the paper slowly. "I think," I said quietly, "our war is waking up." I didn't watch the flash drive a second time. I didn't need to. The man's voice, Claire's cracking composure, Ruth's trembling excuses, they had all settled into the quiet spaces of my house like dust that had been disturbed and would never quite resettle the same way again. I slid the drive into my sweater pocket and closed my hand around it, feeling its small, hard certainty. War, yes, but a war fought in silence, in inches, in careful steps. Margaret Ellis does not charge into battle. She prepares it. The morning light was weak and pale as I walked Patrick Doyle to his car. He promised to call that evening. He promised to draw up paperwork. He promised to protect me. But promises don't stop footsteps in the night, or cars parked too long on a quiet street, or the feeling of breath at your neck when you stand alone in your kitchen. When Patrick drove away, I remained on the porch a moment longer, watching the street. Everything looked normal. Birds fluttered across the yard. A jogger passed by with her headphones on. A dog barked somewhere down the block. And yet, something in the air felt watched. I went back inside and locked the door. I didn't turn the deadbolt just once. I did it twice, hearing the metal click with a sense of finality. I spent the next hour cleaning the kitchen, then the living room, then the hallway. Not because the house needed it, but because I needed to feel the ground under my feet. I needed to remind myself this was still my home, my territory, my life. I was dusting the bookshelf when I noticed it. The back door. It was locked, yes, but it wasn't closed tightly. It sat flush against the frame, but the latch was not seated cleanly in the strike plate. It was lifted. Just enough. Just barely. Just wrong. My body went cold, and then very, very still. I tested the knob the lock held. But someone had tested it recently. Last night, maybe. Or early this morning. A careful test. Silent. Gentle. The kind of test done by someone who didn't want to break in yet, but wanted to see how easy it would be when the moment came. I closed the door firmly, slid the bolt, and pressed my palm flat against the wood. "You don't get to rattle me," I whispered. The house answered with a small creak, as if agreeing. I turned and nearly jumped. Daniel stood outside the window, his face pale, his hand raised mid-knock. I opened the door only a few inches. "Daniel, you scared me half to death." "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't want to call. I wasn't sure well, if they were listening." "They?" I asked. But I already knew who he meant. He stepped inside, shoulders tight with nerves. "I didn't sleep last night," he said. "I kept thinking about that guy, whoever he is. Mom won't tell me his name." "Claire," said I, "didn't need to know. They're hiding things from me, too." He sat at the kitchen table, rubbing his hands together. "Aunt Margaret, I'm scared." The boy in him was showing. The soft, uncertain child, who always stood between two adults who never knew how to love him without using him. I sat across from him. "What happened?" He swallowed hard. "Claire saw me leaving your house yesterday. She followed me home. She asked what I told you." "And?" I asked. I lied. I said we only talked about the appointment. But she didn't believe me. She said if I kept choosing the wrong side, I'd regret it. I inhaled slowly. "The wrong side," he nodded. "She said they're too far into this to let me ruin it. She said this man doesn't tolerate disloyalty." A shadow passed through him as he spoke, darkening the air between us. "She told me to stay away from you," he whispered. "Yet here you are." He gave a small, broken laugh. "I couldn't stay away. I needed to know if you were okay." I studied him a long moment. Daniel meant well. But well-meaning people break under pressure more easily than cruel ones, and Claire and Ruth knew exactly how to press him. "Daniel," I said softly, "you must be careful." He shook his head, eyes brimming with frustration. "I don't want to be in the middle of this. I don't want to choose." "You already have," I said gently. He winced. "Nothing hurts quite like the truth said, without anger." He stood abruptly, pacing. "I'm afraid they'll do something stupid. I'm afraid that man will do something worse. And I'm afraid." He stopped. "Afraid of what?" I asked. "That I'm going to mess this up for you again." There it was, the pivot, the weakness. "Daniel," I said, "listen to me. I don't expect you to fight my battles. I expect you to take care of yourself." He looked at me as though that kindness hurt more than any accusation. "I have to go," he whispered, moving toward the door. "Mom's been calling non-stop." As he opened it, I said, "Daniel." He froze. "Do not tell them about the lawyer." His throat worked. "I won't. I believed he wanted to keep that promise. I did not believe he would." He left without another word. I listened to his footsteps fade down the walkway, each one carrying him toward a choice he was not strong enough to make. The house felt emptier when the door closed behind him. Not lonely, just aware. A few hours passed. I sat with a notebook, listing everything I needed to gather for Patrick. Every document, every letter, every manipulative voicemail, every name, every date. The sun sank low. Shadows lengthened. It was late afternoon when I stepped onto the porch to bring in a potted plant. That's when I saw it. The side gate, normally latched, heavy, stiff, hung wide open. Wide, as if someone had walked through it and not bothered to hide their entry. Or as if someone had left quickly. Too quickly, leaving the gate swinging behind them. I stepped off the porch slowly, the gravel crunching under my shoes. I approached the gate and touched the wood. It was warm, very warm, as if someone had only just passed through moments ago. I looked down. Footprints in the dirt, fresh ones, deep ones, leading around the side of the house, toward the back door whose latch I'd fixed. toward the bedroom window with the scuffed screen, toward the place where the yard meets the shadowed fence line. I followed them halfway before something stopped me. Some old instinct, something primal and sharp that whispered, "Not alone, not now." I turned back toward the house. On the porch lay a single object I hadn't noticed before. A matchstick. Unused, unlit, placed deliberately, not dropped, left for me. Old fear rose in me, fear not of fire, but of warnings, of signals, of messages only meant to be understood by the person they were left for. I bent, picked it up, and felt a cold ribbon slide down my spine. Someone was telling me they could strike a flame whenever they pleased. I closed my hand around the matchstick. Slow retaliation, quiet endurance, strategic patience, yes. But the storm was moving closer. Inside, the phone rang. I answered it on the fourth ring. No greeting, no breath, just Claire's voice, sharp and trembling. "Aunt Margaret," she whispered, "what did you show him?" Her tone wasn't cruel this time. It was terrified. "What did I show who?" I asked calmly. "The man," she whispered. "He said someone leaked something. He said he'll find out who." I said nothing. Claire breathed hard, frantic. "Did you talk to Daniel? Did you tell him anything?" "Aunt Margaret, please tell me you didn't give him anything." I glanced at the matchstick in my hand. "Claire," I said softly, "you should be very careful about the men you make deals with." Her breath hitched. "He's losing patience," she whispered. "I know," I replied. "How?" she demanded. But I did not answer. The line went dead. I stood there in the dim light of my kitchen, holding a match in one hand and the flash drive in the other. The war was no longer quiet. It was beginning to breathe. I stood there, the phone still warm in my hand, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the thin whistle of wind slipping under the eaves. The matchstick rested between my fingers, its wooden body light and cold, like a warning carved in miniature. Somewhere beyond the yard, a dog barked once, sharp and quick, then fell silent. I placed the matchstick beside the flash drive on the kitchen table and sat down slowly, the weight of the moment settling around me like a second skin. The house felt alert, quiet, but not calm. Attentive. Waiting. My husband used to say that a home knows when its owner is afraid. But I didn't feel fear, not in the sense Claire imagined. What I felt was narrower, deeper, a clarity that stiffened my spine and sharpened my breath. Fear is chaos. This was something steadier. Resolve had a heartbeat of its own. The kettle hissed softly on the stove. I turned it off before it could scream. I poured 2 cups of tea out of habit, one for myself and one for the space beside me where my husband used to sit. The steam rose in thin curls, reminding me of old mornings, the kind with soft talk and easy laughter. For a moment, I let myself stand inside those memories, if only to gather strength from the woman I used to be. A car slowed near the curb. Not stopping, just slowing. I set my cup down and moved to the window. A dark sedan rolled past the house at a crawl, the tinted windows not giving away a thing. It didn't stop. It didn't honk. It didn't even speed up when it reached the corner. But it watched. I could feel it. When it turned out of sight, I exhaled and reached for the phone. Patrick answered on the second ring. "Margaret," he said, voice firm but warm. "I was expecting your call." "There's something you need to hear," I said, keeping my tone level. "Claire phoned. She sounded frightened." "Frightened people talk," he replied. "Did she say anything useful?" "No," I said, then paused. "But someone was in my yard again." The line went still. "Margaret," he said carefully, "tell me exactly what happened." I told him about the gate, the footprints, the matchstick on the porch. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "You need to stay inside today. Keep your doors locked. And don't answer the door unless you know exactly who's on the other side. I nodded, even though he couldn't see. What did you find out this morning? He hesitated. Patrick? I pressed. There's more to this than the foreclosure notices, he said. More than the forged signatures. More than the loans. My heartbeat tightened, then steadied. Go on. I contacted the county recorder's office. I wanted to ensure the deed hadn't shifted ownership without your knowledge. Something in his tone made my stomach sink. And? I asked. He inhaled sharply. There's a pending transfer request. My hand closed around the edge of the table. What kind of request? A quiet title action, he said. Filed by a third party. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle. Quiet title. A legal maneuver used when someone wanted to claim property they did not rightfully own. Patrick, I whispered. Who filed it? That's the problem, he said. It wasn't filed under a personal name. It was filed under a holding company. Which one? I asked. Mariner Oak Holdings. The name meant nothing to me, but something about it felt deliberate. Too polished, too distant, too careful. He continued. I looked further. The company was formed 8 months ago. It has one listed officer. No visible business activity. And the address on file? He paused. Patrick, I said, tell me. It's a P.O. box in the next county over, and the person who pays for the box doesn't match the officer on the filing. So it's a shell company, I murmured. Yes, he said. A cover. Someone doesn't want their name anywhere near this. And they're moving fast, Margaret. Very fast. I glanced toward the window, half expecting to see that dark sedan again. How soon could they take the house? I asked. Not without you signing something, or a court ruling, he said firmly. And they won't get either. They're trying, I whispered. I know, he replied, and I'm stopping it. I rested my hand on the flash drive. You haven't seen everything yet. When can I? Come after dark, I said. It will be safer. He didn't argue. I'll be there at 8. When we hung up, the house felt heavier. Not claustrophobic, just aware, as if it knew someone had placed a claim on it without my consent. I sat down, folding my hands together. A quiet title action. A shell company. A man in a suit tapping his pen and threatening consequences. A daughter-in-law lying to protect herself. A sister sinking into debt like it's quicksand pulling her deeper. And Daniel. Poor Daniel. Cracking under the weight of loyalty he never learned how to carry. My tea had gone cold. A soft scratching sound broke the silence. Not inside. Outside. Near the back door. I stood. The sound came again. Slow, deliberate, almost curious. A fingertip dragging along the wood grain. I moved quietly down the hall, each footstep measured and silent. I stopped 3 feet from the door, staying in shadow. The scratching stopped. Then, a soft tap. Not a knock. A tap, the kind you do with the tip of a key, or a coin, or a knife. I didn't breathe. I listened. The tapping came again, lighter this time. Testing. The same way the latch had been tested. The same way the gate had been left open. The same way someone paced the yard last night, like they were learning its map. Slowly, the tapping ceased. I heard faint footsteps move along the porch boards, then down the steps. Gravel shifted. A soft rustle. Footsteps fading. I waited a full minute before looking out the small window beside the door. Nothing. But on the porch boards lay something small and pale. Another matchstick, placed parallel to the first. Not dropped. Delivered. I opened the door just long enough to retrieve it, It was warm, warm as if held only moments before. I closed the door, slid the bolt, and walked back to the kitchen. I set the second matchstick beside the first. 2. One to test the boundary, one to signal the patience wearing thin. I stared at them for a long time. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "We need to talk. I'm sorry." I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered. I typed, "Come by later." He responded instantly. "I can't come. Not safe. But I need to tell you something before they get to you first." They. Not Claire. Not Ruth. They. A hollow opened inside me, a space where dread and certainty intertwined. I typed, "What do you mean?" His answer came in 2 words. "He's here." My breath thinned. "Where?" I typed. A long pause. "At your house. With them. Right now." My pulse beat once. Hard. Like a fist against a door. A car rolled slowly up my drive. I stepped toward the window, heart steady now. Not panicked, not frantic. Steady. 3 figures emerged. 2 familiar. 1 not. Ruth. Claire. And the man from the video. The one who wanted my house. The one who whispered about patience. The one who sat in kitchens and made threats with the casual ease of someone who had done this before. They walked toward my porch in a line. I stood in the hallway, watching them through the glass as they approached, silent and certain. Claire lifted her hand to knock, but I was already standing in the doorway, one hand on the knob, the matchsticks in my other palm. I opened the door before she touched it. Their faces froze. "Hello?" I said quietly, my voice calm as settling dust. "I've been expecting you." "Hello?" I said quietly, my voice calm as settling dust. "I've been expecting you." None of them spoke at first. Ruth's mouth hung slightly open, like she'd rehearsed some dramatic opening line, and I'd stolen it from her by answering too soon. Claire's hands tightened around the folder she held, her knuckles a pale, trembling white. The man between them, taller than I remembered from the video, sharper in the daylight, regarded me with the kind of clinical interest you'd reserve for a puzzle, not a person. His eyes swept over me, over the doorway, over the faint line where the shadow of the doorframe met the light on my floor, measuring everything. Measuring me. "Mrs. Ellis?" he said finally. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of tone men use when they're used to being listened to. "Thank you for answering the door." I raised one eyebrow. "You're on my porch. It would have been rude not to." He smiled as if I'd said something charming instead of something true. "May we come in?" he asked. Ruth jumped in before I could answer. "Margaret, this is—" I held up a hand. "I didn't ask you," I said. Her mouth snapped shut, offended. I let the moment stretch between us, long enough to feel the tension settle like dust in sunlight. "I don't invite strangers into my home," I said, turning my gaze to the man. "And you, sir, are a stranger." He seemed amused by that. "My apologies. I should have introduced myself. I'm Mr. Hayes." The name slid off his tongue too easily. The kind of name you could acquire in an afternoon if you knew the right people and had the right money. "Of course you are," I said. His eyes narrowed just the slightest bit. "Your niece and sister have told me great things about you. They care deeply about your well-being." I regarded the 2 women flanking him. Ruth couldn't quite meet my gaze. Claire could, but there was something raw behind her eyes. Fear, maybe, or the first thread of shame tugging loose. "Is that so?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks less like well-being." and more like cleaning up their mess. He chuckled. You're very direct, Mrs. Ellis. I appreciate that. I'm old, I said. I don't have time for people who talk in circles. He shifted his weight, leaning ever so slightly into the doorway without crossing it. Testing boundaries. Seeing how close he could get without tripping something. We're all here because we want to avoid unnecessary trouble, he said. There's been a misunderstanding with your property. Some paperwork. Some timing issues. I'm simply here to help resolve it smoothly. Misunderstanding? I repeated. Is that what you call forgery these days? Behind him, Claire flinched as if I'd slapped her. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. Now, let's not use words we can't support. Oh, I can support it, I said. I can support every syllable, Mr. Hayes. Ruth's voice exploded then, shriller than she meant it to be. Margaret, don't start this. I didn't look at her. You came to my porch, I said evenly, so you'll forgive me if I choose how the conversation starts. A car rolled slowly past the house. I didn't turn, but in my periphery I saw it. A modest sedan, not the gray one. For a flicker of a second, I thought it might be Daniel. The thought settled into my chest like a stone. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat softly. We can handle this one of two ways. Quietly, or less quietly. I've never found threats particularly persuasive, I said. Especially not from men who introduced themselves after filing quiet title actions under shell companies. His smile vanished. Ruth stared at me, stunned. How do you know about that? I finally glanced at her. You forget who I married. Your brother read every line of every document he ever signed. And he kept everything. You thought I wouldn't notice when someone tried to rewrite the ending of his story? We didn't mean, she started. You rarely do, I said. Mr. Hayes composed himself quickly. You've been advised, he said carefully. I see. Advised, I repeated. Is that the polite word for lawyer, where you come from? His gaze moved, just slightly, toward the street. Looking for a car that wasn't there. For a man named Doyle. Mrs. Ellis, he said, returning his eyes to me. I'm not your enemy. I made an agreement with your family. They approached me. They needed help. And you gave it, I said. At a price. He shrugged, as if we were discussing the cost of a nice lunch. Everyone pays for what they want. And what do you want? I asked. Silence. Then, the house, he said. No pretense now, no softening. Clean, uncontested, transferable. The word clean stuck in the air like smoke. And what do Ruth and Claire want? I asked. He smiled thinly. To stop drowning. I looked at my sister then. Her lipstick was smeared. Her blouse, though carefully chosen, hung a little crooked on one side, as if she'd dressed in a hurry. She didn't look like a villain. She looked like a woman who'd made a long chain of small, selfish choices and finally reached the end of it. Margaret, she said, her voice wobbling, we're in trouble. Real trouble. You have no idea what it's been like. You're right, I said. I have no idea what it's like to use someone else's home as a life raft. Claire shifted, the folder rattling slightly in her hands. Aunt Margaret, she said, and her voice sounded younger than I'd ever heard it. If you just sign. Sign what? I asked. My life away? My history? My husband's work? For what? For you to walk away from your own consequences? Her eyes filled with tears. Real ones this time. Not the practiced kind. It's not just us, she whispered. You don't understand. Mr. Hayes cut in smoothly. Let's stay focused. No one wants to harm you, Mrs. Ellis. We simply want to avoid the ugliness of legal action. lawsuits, hearings, investigations. These things are stressful, especially at your age. The insult was so softly delivered, it almost sounded like concern. "Ah," I said quietly. "There it is." "There. What is?" he asked. "The underestimation," I said. "It always shows up eventually." His jaw tightened again. I opened my hand. The 2 matchsticks lay in my palm, thin and pale against my skin. Claire's breath caught. Ruth went white. Mr. Hayes' gaze dropped briefly to my hand. 1 matchstick he might have dismissed. 2 were a message. "I found these on my porch," I said. "1 yesterday. 1 today. Warm. Both of them. Left where only I would see." Mr. Hayes' expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. A calculation, a note, a cataloging of what I knew. "Matches are cheap," he said lightly. "You shouldn't let small things upset you." "Oh, I'm not upset," I said. "I'm informed." We stood there, the 4 of us, the space between us, thick with unspoken things. The willow tree rustled in the faint breeze, casting shifting shadows across the yard. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started. Ordinary sounds wrapping themselves around an extraordinary moment. "You've been in my yard," I said. "You've tested my windows, my doors. You've watched my house. You've filed quiet title actions behind my back. You've used my name on documents I never saw. And now you're on my porch asking me to sign myself out of my own life." "I'm offering you relief," he said calmly, "from bills, from repairs, from stress. You can move somewhere smaller, quieter. They want to care for you. That's all this is." I laughed then. A short, dry sound. "You know what the problem is with men like you, Mr. Hayes?" I asked. He tilted his head. "Enlighten me." "You think everyone is as small as the deals you make," I said. "You think all love is transactional. You think all history can be bought. That a house is just a number. That an old woman is just a signature." His silence was the closest thing to honesty he'd offered. "But this house is more than that," I continued. "It's where my husband and I built a life. Where we raised children. Where we buried one. Where we fought and made up and painted rooms at midnight because we were too stubborn to stop. You're not asking me to sign a deed. You're asking me to erase myself." I stepped a fraction closer to the threshold. "And that," I said softly, "will never happen." Mr. Hayes' smile was gone now. Completely. His face was calm, but his eyes were cold. "You understand," he said slowly. "There will be consequences." "Oh, I'm counting on it," I replied. He stared at me for a long moment, taking my measure again, recalibrating. "We're out of time," he said finally. "The bank is restless. My partners are restless. I can't keep them at bay much longer. If you cooperate, I can make this less painful." "And if I don't?" I asked. He glanced past me, into the dim of my hallway, at the framed photographs on the wall. My boys. My husband. The life he wanted to pry away. "Then they'll say you're confused," he said. "Unstable, vulnerable. There's already a file with APS. There are already notations of concern. Courts listen to that kind of thing." "APS has already been here," I said, "twice, and they've heard my recordings." For the first time, something like surprise flashed across his face. "Recordings?" he repeated. I smiled, just a little. "You're not the only one who knows how to prepare, Mr. Hayes." Ruth grabbed his arm. "You told them?" she whispered, panic flaring. "You told APS about us?" I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on him. "I told APS the truth," I said. And I have more where that came from. Video, audio, paperwork. I'm an old woman, Mr. Hayes. Do you know what that means? He said nothing. It means I've had time to learn where to put things so they can't be easily taken, I said. Copies, backups, people who know where to look if anything happens to me. Tell me, what do you think happens when a woman with a neat little file of evidence against a predatory lender suddenly goes missing, or falls, or forgets she owned a house? The silence that followed had teeth. Mr. Hayes finally stepped back from the threshold. This isn't over, he said quietly. No, I agreed. It isn't. He turned and walked down the steps, his shoes crunching on the gravel with that precise, measured rhythm of a man who believed he still had many moves left on the board. Ruth followed, panic shaking her shoulders. Margaret, please, don't do this. You're being stubborn. You don't know what he'll— Ruth, I said gently. She stopped, halfway down. You lit this match, I said, glancing at the thin sticks in my hand. You don't get to act surprised at the fire. Her face crumpled for a moment, then hardened again. She hurried after him. Only Claire remained on the porch. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there, staring at the threshold as if it were the edge of a cliff. Aunt Margaret, she said finally, her voice frayed. Yes. I didn't know about all of it, she whispered. Not at first. By the time I understood, we were already in too deep. I thought I could control it. I thought I could protect us. I told myself if we just got the house, we'd fix everything. And now? I asked. She swallowed. Now I think there might not be anything left to fix. For the first time, I saw her clearly, not just as the woman who lied and manipulated and smiled with sharp teeth, but as a deeply flawed, deeply frightened person who had walked herself into a cage, one favor, one signature, one lie at a time. You still have choices, I said. Her eyes filled. He said if we don't deliver, he'll come after us. All of us. I tilted my head. He already has. She closed her eyes briefly. Claire, I said softly, you can keep walking behind him, or you can stop. She looked up at me, something desperate and fragile in her expression. I don't know how, she whispered. That, I said gently, is the first honest thing you've said to me in months. A car horn sounded down the street. Mr. Hayes called her name. His voice clipped. She flinched. I have to go, she said. Yes, I replied. For now. She stepped backward, off my porch. Before she turned away, she looked at the matchsticks in my hand. He's not bluffing, she said. He doesn't bluff. Neither do I replied. She nodded once, as if filing that away, and then she walked down the path. When their car pulled out of the driveway, I watched until it disappeared. Only then did I close the door. The house exhaled with me. I locked it, turned the bolt, galvanized by something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just resolve, but something like defiance standing shoulder to shoulder with it. On the hall table, the phone buzzed. A message from Patrick. I found something else. We need to talk in person. It changes everything. I stared at the screen, at those last 3 words. Changes everything. I set the matchsticks down next to the flash drive and the foreclosure letter. All right, I murmured to the empty room, to my husband's photograph, to the walls that had heard all of it. Let's see how much more you thought you could take before I learned how to take it back. I stared at Patrick's message for a long moment, the glow of the screen cutting a thin white line across my kitchen table. Outside, the early evening air had deepened into a kind of bruised gray, one of those dusks that makes the world feel smaller, closer, like everything is drawing itself inward to watch what happens next. I found something else. We need to talk in person. It changes everything. The words were too heavy for a phone. They needed breath, a voice, a face. I slid the phone onto the table, took a slow sip of now cold tea, and let the weight of the day settle into my bones. The matchsticks sat beside the flash drive like two thin, pale warnings. I didn't touch them again. I simply let them rest there, a reminder that someone out there believed I was supposed to be afraid. Fear is a choice, and I had stopped choosing it. At precisely 7:58, headlights rolled up my driveway. Steady, slow, familiar. Patrick Doyle's old sedan. He parked carefully, the way he always did, as if leaving space was a kind of respect. I opened the door before he could knock. He stood there in a long coat, collar turned up against the cooling air, leather briefcase in hand. His face was tight, not with panic, but with the kind of gravity lawyers only bring when the truth is heavy. "Margaret," he said, "come in." He stepped inside, shutting the door with the care of someone who understood a house's moods. He scanned the room once, eyes lingering briefly on the matchsticks and flash drive, then sat at the kitchen table without waiting to be invited. His silence spoke louder than his greeting. I poured him tea. He didn't object, though he didn't drink it. Instead, he unlocked the brass clasp on his briefcase and slid a thin manila folder across the table toward me. "Before we open that," he said quietly, "I need to ask, are you feeling steady tonight?" I met his eyes. "I am," he nodded once. "Good. What I'm about to show you, it isn't simple." "Nothing has been simple in a long time," I said. He pressed the folder gently with his fingertips. I went back through the county records. All of them. Not just the recent ones. I looked at every filing tied to your house for the last 40 years. My breath stilled. 40 years. The span of my marriage. The span of my life with Henry. Patrick continued. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was looking for confirmation that the property line had never shifted. I needed to rule out clerical errors. And I found something your husband hid. The room didn't move, but my chest tightened, slow and deep. "Hidden?" I asked softly. Patrick nodded. "Yes, intentionally." He opened a folder and turned it toward me. Inside was a document with a faded county seal, an old property addendum, yellowed at the edges with time. It wasn't the deed itself, it was something else. Something supplemental. Something I had never seen. "What is this?" I asked. "Look at the second page," he said. I flipped it over with hands that suddenly felt older than the rest of me. There, in the middle of the page, was my husband's handwriting. His signature. His looping letters. His steady lines. A note, written in ink that had faded just slightly. To be used only if the property is ever contested. Keep this document with the parcel file. H.E., my breath caught on the initials. H.E. Henry Ellis. My husband signed everything formally, even notes like this. I traced the letters lightly with my fingertip, feeling the familiar curves. Patrick let me have the moment before he spoke again. Your husband filed this quietly. Didn't tell the family. Didn't tell anyone. He had it notarized privately, attached it to a parcel map, and requested the clerk log it under a secondary index. It didn't surface in your main deed file. I only found it because I searched manually. I looked up. Why would he hide something like this? Patrick exhaled. Because it isn't just a document. It's a slope map. A what? He tapped the lower half of the page. Your property line extends farther than the deed indicates. Henry filed an amendment, correcting the map. Your lot is larger than any of us realized, for good reason. He flipped to the third page, a printed map. The contour lines of the land behind the house. The slope showing where the land dipped toward the ravine. A red boundary line circled the back portion, land I had always assumed was city-owned. That land, Patrick said quietly, is worth money, a lot of money. I blinked. What kind of money? He lowered his voice as if the house itself needed the truth delivered gently. Developers have been trying to buy up parcels along this ravine for years. Conservation ordinances stopped most of it. But if someone controlled even one piece of privately held land, especially one with a clear title and slope access, they would have leverage over the entire area. I felt the room tilt, not violently, but slowly, like a boat shifting in deep water. "You're saying they don't want my house," I whispered. "They want the land." "Yes," he said. "The house is incidental. The land behind it, the part your husband secured quietly, is the real prize." I sat back, the breath leaving me in a low, steady stream. Henry. My Henry. All these years I'd tended the garden, the trees, the old stone path that wound toward the back fence. I'd assumed everything stopped at the tree line. But he'd known. He'd known people would come. He'd left a map like a shield. Patrick continued, voice steady. "Whoever this Mr. Hayes is, he knows about the land. The shell company is tied to a larger development group. They have already bought several properties in the next county over. They're trying to force a corridor through this ravine. If they get your land, they get the access they need." I felt heat bloom behind my ribs. Not anger exactly. Something older. Something deeper. "They forged my signature," I said. "Because they needed to get that land quietly, before anyone noticed." "Yes," Patrick confirmed. "And the quiet title action they filed? If it had gone through without challenge, it would have wiped out your husband's amendment. The corrected map would disappear. They'd claim the land after foreclosure. Clean. Uncontested." He paused. "They were not just stealing your home, Margaret. They were erasing your husband's protections." My throat tightened. I closed the folder gently, respectfully, as if closing the lid on something holy. "Patrick," I said softly, "why didn't Henry tell me?" Patrick hesitated. "Maybe he didn't want you burdened by it while he was alive. Maybe he thought the danger would pass. Maybe he didn't want you to worry." I nodded slowly. It sounded like Henry. He always bore weight quietly. Then Patrick leaned in, lowering his voice even further. "There's more." The word slid into the air like a blade. I lifted my eyes. "2 names appear on the original plat filing," he said. "Your husband's and another." My pulse flickered. "Whose?" I whispered. He turned the last page of the folder, and there, in a looping, unmistakable hand, was a signature I had not seen in more than 30 years. R. Ellis. I stared at it. Not my son, not a cousin, not a family friend. R. Ellis. Ruth. My sister. My throat went dry. Patrick watched me, giving me room to breathe. "She was there," he said quietly. "She signed the original boundary correction with Henry." I closed my eyes, letting truth wash through me like cold water. Ruth knew. Ruth knew about the land. Ruth knew about the correction. Ruth knew how valuable it was. Ruth had known for decades. And Ruth pretended this was just about debt. Patrick's voice broke through my 1,000 thoughts. "Margaret," he said gently, "your sister has been lying to you for a very, very long time." I inhaled slowly, deeply, letting the air fill the hollow space that truth had carved inside me. When I opened my eyes again, something in me had sharpened. The house felt it. The air felt it. Even the night outside the window seemed to lean closer. "This changes everything," I whispered. Patrick nodded. "It does." I closed the folder. "Then it's time," I said, my voice steady. "Time to stop letting them come to my door." Patrick watched me carefully. "What do you have in mind?" I looked toward the dark window, the shadows moving through the yard like thoughts gathering themselves. I I said softly. It's time to invite them to come clean. I think, I said softly, it's time to invite them to come clean. Patrick watched me over the rim of his glasses, the late light glinting off the lenses. You're sure you're up for that? He asked. I've been up for it since the first time Claire tapped on my glass door like she already lived here, I said. I just didn't know it yet. He gave a small, dry smile. Then we don't wait for the next knock. We schedule it. What are you suggesting? I asked. A meeting, he said. Here. On your terms. Invite Ruth and Claire. Tell them you're willing to. Talk about options before lawyers get involved. They'll come. Hayes will come too. He won't let them handle this alone anymore. And while they're here, APS, I finished, and the bank. And me, he said. With every document your husband ever filed, I breathed out slowly. You really think they'll walk into that? He leaned back, folding his hands over his briefcase. People who think they're holding all the cards never expect someone else to change the game. I nodded. Then let's change it. We planned it in careful, quiet steps. He would reach out to Ms. Carter at Adult Protective Services, share the recordings and the video from the flash drive, explain the forged documents and the weaponized concern. He would contact a representative from the bank's fraud department and ask them, politely, whether they wanted to discover a mess in private or in open court. He would ask them both to come by, quote, to clarify matters. I would do my part. I would pick up the phone and invite my own storm to my front door. After he left, I stood in the hallway with the receiver in my hand, the house listening. I dialed Ruth first. She answered on the second ring. Margaret. Ruth, I said, we need to talk. A pause, wary. About what? About the house, I said. About the loans. About the land behind the ravine you signed with Henry 30 years ago. I let that hang for a heartbeat. About everything. Silence. Then a shaky breath. Where did you? I'm not arguing with you on the phone, I said. Come tomorrow, 3 o'clock. Bring Claire. Bring whatever papers Hayes told you to bring. Hayes? She repeated, voice climbing. Yes, I said. You should bring him too. If he wants the house so badly, he can look me in the eye while he talks about it. This isn't a good idea, she said quickly. We should meet somewhere neutral. This is neutral, I replied. This is my home. I'm giving you one chance to step into it honestly, she swallowed audibly. Are you going to sign? I let a small, humorless smile tug at my mouth. I'm going to listen. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to show you some things. What happens after that is up to you. Another long pause. We'll be there, she said finally, and hung up before I could say more. I set the phone down and rested my hand on the smooth wood of the hall table. The house seemed to exhale with me, its boards shifting softly. The knock that would change everything was no longer in their control. It was in mine. The night before the meeting, the air felt too still. The sky hung low and hard, the way it does right before a storm decides whether it's coming or not. I moved through the house, checking the locks, even though I already knew they were set. Front door, back door, side door, guest room window. Every latch clicked under my fingers. Every bolt slid home. I made tea. I set my papers out on the kitchen table. The deed, the slope map with Henry's note, the copies Patrick had made, the printed stills from the video, the APS case number on a neat sheet of paper. It was almost midnight when I turned off the lights and left only the small lamp in the living room. I had just settled into bed when I heard it, a faint scrape. Not the house's usual creak, not the wind shaking a branch. A deliberate sound. Metal against metal. At the back door. My body went very still, the way it did the night my youngest had a fever, and every breath sounded like it might be the last. Old instincts surface when the world gets too quiet. I slipped out of bed and took the heavy flashlight from the nightstand, its weight familiar in my hand. The pry bar lay beneath the bed frame, exactly where I'd left it. I didn't pick it up. Not yet. I didn't intend to swing anything tonight. In the hallway, I paused and listened. Another sound. Soft, careful. The turn of a handle held just shy of a full test. Someone who wanted to know how far the door would give without making noise. They'd done this before. Not just with doors. With people. I moved to the kitchen in the dark, letting my eyes adjust. The porch light had not come on, which meant whoever was out there was standing to the side of the motion sensor. Not careless. Not new at this. The sound came again. A thin click. The suggestion of pressure on the lock. I stepped to the side of the door, where the small window wouldn't betray my shadow. My heart beat steady, not wild, a slow drum in my chest. There's a kind of courage that comes with age, not because you stop fearing danger, but because you've simply lived with it long enough to know you can survive the way it makes your hand shake. The handle turned, harder this time. The deadbolt held. The wood trembled. "Enough," I said, my voice low but clear. The pressure on the handle stopped. For a moment there was nothing. No footsteps, no breath, just the thick pause of someone reconsidering. Then, from the other side of the door, a man's voice. "Mrs. Ellis," he said softly, "you're up late." "Hayes?" "Of course." "Mr. Hayes," I replied. "You're trespassing," he laughed quietly. "Big word for this hour." "I have more," I said. "Want to hear breaking and entering next?" "I haven't broken anything," he said. I was concerned. "You've been difficult to reach." "The door will not make that easier for you," I said. "Step away from my house." A beat. Then, "We're all on the same side here." "You're very fond of that line," I said. "I notice you only use it when you're standing on the wrong side of something that belongs to someone else." His tone sharpened. "Tomorrow isn't going to go the way you think. Tomorrow is going to go exactly the way the truth demands," I said. "And right now, the truth is that if you're not off my porch in 10 seconds, I will call the police and tell them a man with motive and opportunity is trying to force his way into the home of his elderly Mark the night before a legal meeting." Silence. Then, unexpectedly, the porch light flared on, blind and sudden. I blinked at the brightness, then realized it wasn't the motion sensor. It was my neighbor across the fence, fumbling with his own garbage can, staring at my lit-up porch, and the man in the dark jacket standing far too close to my back door. "Everything all right there, Mrs. Ellis?" he called. Hayes stepped back, just a fraction. "Enough." "Fine, Jeff," I called back, not taking my eyes off the shadow on my porch. "Just someone who lost his way." Hayes didn't respond. A second later, his footsteps moved away across the boards. Then, gravel. Then the low growl of a car engine starting. I stayed by the door until the sound faded completely. No broken glass, no forced lock, no bruises. Just a mark drawn more clearly in the sand. Physical danger, yes, but not the kind he thought would make me crumble. The next afternoon, the house was ready before I was. The floors had been swept, the good cups set out. My husband's photo dusted, his smile looking out over the room like a quiet witness. By 2:45, the documents were laid out on the kitchen table in careful order. At 2:50, Patrick arrived, his old briefcase clutched like a shield. "You look steady," he said when I opened the door. "I am steady," I replied. "I am also very, very tired of being underestimated." He gave a tight nod. "APS is on their way. The bank representative will be slightly late, but she promised to attend. We won't begin until they're inside." "And Daniel?" I asked. "He texted me," Patrick said. He's torn, but he'll come. He sat at the table and opened his case. The manila folder with the slope map rested on top. The flash drive lay beside it. The recorder. The printed foreclosure notices with my forged name. A little army of truths lined up in rows. At 3 o'clock sharp there was a knock at the front door. Not the hard, official knock of APS. Not the casual tap of a neighbor. 3 heavy, deliberate taps. The kind that settles into the walls. The kind I already knew by heart. Family drama has a way of arriving quietly, slipping into a home long before the betrayal becomes obvious. I felt the echo of that first line move through me as I walked down the hallway. The grain of the wood under my fingertips. The faint hum of my heartbeat. The knowledge that the danger was not on the other side of the door. It was waiting to be exposed in my kitchen. I opened the door. Ms. Carter stood on the porch, folder in hand, her expression controlled but not unkind. Daniel stood beside her, shoulders tight, eyes wide. Behind them idled a car with tinted windows. A familiar silhouette in the driver's seat, watching. "Mrs. Ellis," Miss Carter said. "As we discussed, we're here to clarify some things." "Come in," I said. They stepped inside. The house seemed to lean forward. "Is he?" Daniel began, glancing over his shoulder at the car. "Yes," I said. "He'll come in when he thinks the stage belongs to him." We walked back to the kitchen together. Patrick stood when they entered, extending a hand. "Patrick Doyle, counsel for Mrs. Ellis." Miss Carter shook it, her brows lifting just barely. "Adult Protective Services. I see I'm not the only one taking this seriously." Daniel sat at the edge of a chair as if he might bolt at any moment. 3:05. Another knock. This one brisk. Impatient. "Showtime," Patrick murmured. I answered the door again. Ruth swept in first, her perfume arriving half a second before her body. Her eyes flicked around the hallway, taking inventory of the changed air. Claire followed, her grip tight on a folder. Makeup heavier than usual, as if she'd tried to paint steadiness onto her own face. Hayes stepped in last. No smile this time. He looked at me the way a man looks at weather, calculating whether to wait it out or run through it. "Mrs. Ellis," he said, "I hope we can resolve this efficiently." "That depends," I said. "Come through." They entered the kitchen and stopped short. Lawyer, APS. Nephew with his hands twisted together. Papers spread on the table like a small courtroom. Miss Carter's badge glinted in the afternoon light. Claire's face drained of color. Ruth went still. Hayes, expression shuddered. "We didn't agree to this," he said. "You agreed to come talk," I replied. "We're talking." Patrick gestured to the chairs. "Please, sit." They didn't, not right away. Hayes looked at Ruth, then Claire, then at Daniel, whose eyes were locked on the table. "You told me this was a family meeting," Ruth hissed at me. "It is," I said. "Every person in this room is here because of something my family did, or had done to them." Reluctantly, they sat. Patrick folded his hands. "Let me be absolutely clear," he said. "This is not an ambush. This is an opportunity for truth, for correction, and perhaps, if you're very fortunate, for mercy." Ruth scoffed. Hayes leaned back, crossing his arms. Claire stared at the documents as if they might bite. Miss Carter opened her folder. "We're here today because multiple reports were filed, alleging Mrs. Ellis is cognitively compromised and unable to manage her affairs. We conducted our investigation. We found no evidence to support those claims." None. Hayes' jaw tightened. "You may not see it yet, but aging." "Mr. Hayes," she cut in, "our report is complete. However, we did find something else." She glanced at me. I nodded. She took out a small recorder, the copy Patrick had made of mine, and set it on the table. With Mrs. Ellis' permission, we reviewed these recordings. They capture conversations between her, Ms. Claire Jennings, and Ms. Ruth Ellis. She hit play. Claire's voice filled the kitchen, bright and false. "You need to sign, Aunt Margaret. And if you won't, well, there are other ways to prove you can't manage things." The words fell into the room like stones. The younger worker who had come with Miss Carter at the earlier visit was not here today. She didn't need to be. The recorder spoke loudly enough. "We already scheduled the assessment. The clinic will back us up. You don't need to understand everything we're doing. You just need to let us." Daniel winced at his own voice in the background. "She didn't ask for any assessment, Claire. You told me she did. Don't worry about the details. She won't remember any of this anyway." When the recording ended, the house was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Claire's hands shook. Ruth's lips parted soundlessly. Hayes' eyes flicked to each of them in turn, measuring, recalculating. "This recording," Ms. Carter said calmly, "combined with our findings, suggests deliberate manipulation of this agency to gain control of a competent adult's estate. That is not a misunderstanding. That is abuse of process." Hayes smirked faintly. "This is nothing but a family argument taken out of context." Patrick slid the flash drive across the table. "Then let's add context." He plugged it into the laptop and turned the screen so everyone could see. Ruth's kitchen appeared. The sunflower curtains. Claire's unpainted, frightened face. Hayes in his suit, tapping a pen. "You said she'd sign," he said on the video. "You told us the house would be secured by now." Claire's recorded voice trembled. "We're working on it." The real Claire flinched. "You told the clinic she was confused," Video Hayes said. "Make her look otherwise." The man at my table shifted in his chair, his calm cracking. "This is illegal," he snapped. "Recording private conversations." "Actually," Patrick said mildly, "in this state, only one party has to know a recording is being made. And in every recording we've gathered, at least one person did." "Who?" Ruth demanded, voice thin with panic. "Who did this?" Daniel cleared his throat. Every head turned. "Me," he said. I looked at him, surprised, then not surprised at all. "I set the phone on the counter," he said quietly. I couldn't stand it anymore. The lies. The pressure. The way you were planning around her like she was furniture. Claire stared at him as if he'd struck her. "Daniel, how could you? How could I?" He cut in, voice shaking. "How could I not? You were going to ruin her. You were going to ruin us." "For what? For another chance to crawl out of a hole you dug yourselves?" Ruth slapped her hand on the table. "We did this for you," she snapped. "For your future." "No," he said. "You did it because you were drowning and didn't want to let go of the gold watch you were wearing while you sank." His voice cracked, but he didn't look away. He chose his side, finally. Out loud. Hayes sneered. "So the boy grew a conscience. How touching!" Patrick opened his folder again and laid out the slope map. Henry's careful note. Ruth's old signature. "Let's talk about something less sentimental," he said. "Mr. Hayes, you, operating as Mariner Oak Holdings, filed a quiet title action on this property with the intent to wipe out this amendment and secure access to the ravine behind the house, correct?" "I won't dignify that with anything besides the truth," Patrick interjected. "This document was filed by Henry Ellis and Ruth Ellis 32 years ago, correcting the boundaries, securing the land. It is legally binding. Any attempt to ignore it in later filings will be interpreted as fraud. and any attempt to obtain it through forged signatures will be prosecuted as such. Ruth stared at her own young handwriting like it belonged to someone else. "You knew," I said quietly, "all this time. You knew what the land was worth. You what Henry was protecting. And you stood on my porch and told me this was just about my big house and your concern for my safety." Tears welled suddenly in her eyes, not pretty ones. Raw, hot, uncontained. "I was supposed to be part of it," she whispered. He promised to protect me," I said. "Not to make you rich." The bank representative slipped in then, almost unnoticed, until she set her briefcase on the counter and spoke. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said. "Traffic." She looked at Hayes. "And you must be the gentleman who thought we wouldn't notice 3 refinances with a signature that doesn't match the original records." He bristled. "I don't know who you think you are." "Fraud investigations," she said smoothly. "We've been reviewing Mrs. Ellis' file since Mr. Doyle contacted us. The loans in question are in severe default and appear to be secured with forged documents. That is a crime. More than one." Claire made a small sound, like something in her had cracked. I didn't," she stammered. "You didn't hold the pen," the woman said, eyeing Hayes. "But you benefited. And you participated in covering it up." Miss Carter closed her folder. "Adult Protective Services will be adding our findings to that investigation. We will also note that Mrs. Ellis is competent, organized, and aware, and that attempts were made to portray her otherwise for financial gain." Hayes looked around the table and realized, too late, that the hill he thought he stood on alone had been quietly excavated from beneath him. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he said, but the threat landed weak. Patrick smiled, almost gently. "We do now." Hayes pushed back his chair so hard it scraped the floor. "This meeting is over." "Not for me," I said. He froze. I stood slowly, feeling every year in my bones and none of them on my back. "You came onto my porch," I said, "into my home, into my family. You walked through my memories like they were inventory. You thought my age made me an easy mark. You called my mind into question because you could not imagine a woman like me might be sharper than you." I stepped around the table until I stood opposite him, the wood between us like a line drawn. "You left matchsticks on my porch," I said. "You tapped at my door at midnight. You stood under my willow tree and looked into my windows like a wolf sniffing at a coop." "No more." His eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing me of—" "I don't need to accuse you of anything," I said softly. "I just need to tell the truth. And I've already told it to the people in this room who can now do something about it." The bank representative folded her hands. "Mr. Hayes, we'll be in touch. Outside of this home, with counsel present, I suggest you do not contact Mrs. Ellis again." Miss Carter added, "Any further reports filed about her mental state will be reviewed with suspicion by more than one agency." For a moment, Hayes looked like he might step around the table. His body tensed, his hand flexed. Physical danger lives in small movements. I recognized it. Daniel stood up before he could make any choice. "Don't," he said, voice low but firm. Hayes glanced at him, surprised. "You've used my mother," Daniel said. "You've used Claire. You will not touch her. It wasn't a dramatic shove. It wasn't a fist. Just a man who had spent his whole life folding himself small, finally taking up the space he was meant to occupy." Hayes saw something there. Backbone or witnesses, or both. He looked at me one last time, a promise of future trouble dying on his tongue, then turned and walked out. The screen door banged shut behind him. Ruth broke first. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry, a messy, inelegant sound. "I didn't know it would go this far," she sobbed. I thought I thought we'd just take care of you and the house would solve it. You thought the house would absolve you, Patrick said quietly. It doesn't. Claire was silent. Her eyes shone, but she didn't cry. She looked at the flash drive, the recordings, the map, each one a piece of the cage she had helped build. Aunt Margaret, she said finally, her voice hoarse. I'm so sorry. There are apologies that come too early, thrown out like seeds on rock, meaningless. This was not one of them. This one came late, after the damage, after the lies, after the scaffolding had already been ripped away. I was selfish, she whispered. I was scared. I told myself I was protecting Daniel, protecting Mom, protecting us, but I was protecting our bad decisions. I see that now. She lifted her eyes to mine, and in them I saw not the girl who married my nephew, not the woman who smiled while she lied, but a human being stripped of every excuse. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. I just didn't want this to happen without telling you I know what I did. The room waited. Forgiveness is not a trick you perform to keep the peace. It is a choice you make when your own heart is heavy enough and you're tired of carrying the weight of someone else's sins. I won't pretend this didn't happen, I said. I won't pretend trust can be taped back together like torn paper. It can't. Her chin trembled. I know. But, I added, you were used. You allowed yourself to be. You hurt me. But you were not the mastermind here. And you came from a woman who taught you shortcuts instead of apologies. Ruth let out a broken sob. I can't fix what you did, I said, and I won't shield you from the consequences. But I can decide whether your worst moment is the only one I ever remember. Margaret, Ruth choked, lifting her face. Please, I am not ready to forgive you, I said to her. Not yet. Maybe not in this lifetime. It landed between us, clean and sharp. But I am ready, I continued, to let you carry the weight you earned instead of shouldering it for you. APS. The bank. The law. They'll all do what they must. That's not revenge. That's justice. Ruth's shoulders sagged. Somehow, under the collapse, she looked lighter. Being seen clearly has a way of stripping something away, even when it hurts. I turned back to Claire. As for you, I said, if you want a different life than the one that led you here, you will need to build it from the ground up. Without other people's roofs to shelter under. Without my house as your crutch. If you want to visit someday, it will be as a guest, not as someone measuring the windows. Tears slid down her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered, for even leaving the door cracked. Daniel stepped forward then, his voice small. Aunt Margaret, he said, I don't know how to ask for anything from you after all this, but I need you to know I want to be better than the son she made me and the husband I've been. I don't deserve your trust. But if there's a way for me to earn back even a corner of it, I said gently. He nodded. I studied him. The boy who had always been in the middle, the man who finally stepped out of it. You start, I said, by telling the truth when no one is watching, to the bank, to APS, to whoever asks. You cooperate fully. You testify if it comes to that, not for me, for yourself. Then you get help, real help, and maybe, someday, you come over for dinner and we talk about weather and TV and nothing at all, and I don't feel the need to count my silverware afterward. That's the best I can offer today, his eyes filled. It's more than I deserve. Probably, I said. Take it anyway. The officials packed their folders. The bank representative exchanged cards with Patrick. Miss Carter squeezed my shoulder before she left. You were never the victim they thought you were, she murmured. I was, I said, just not the kind they meant. When the last car pulled away, the house fell silent. Not empty, clean. I stood in the doorway and watched the street reclaim its ordinary rhythm. Neighbors walked dogs. A child rode a bicycle past the willow tree, oblivious to the war that had raged quietly inside this house. Later, after Patrick left with promises of formal filings and lien reversals and recorded protections, I made myself tea. I sat at the same kitchen table where Claire once nudged a stack of papers toward me and said, "Trust me," like it was a favor I owed her. The afternoon light fell in the same way it always had, across the tile, across my hands, across the manila folder with my husband's handwriting. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't been able to name before. Family drama had arrived quietly in my life, yes. It had slipped through side doors and soft words, and the kind of smiles that never reach center. It had tried to take everything I had left of the man I loved. But redemption had arrived quietly, too. In the form of a neighbor's porch light, in the tremor of a nephew finally telling the truth, in the steady patience of an old lawyer who still believed in paper and ink, in my own refusal to sign myself out of my own story. Looking back now, I see that the knock on the door was never just the sound of betrayal arriving. It was the sound of a line being drawn. They thought that day would be the beginning of my end, but it was the beginning of theirs. What I learned from it all was this: age does not erase you unless you agree to disappear. Love does not require you to be naive. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open the door, let the storm walk in, and sit there calm and upright while the truth does the work you no longer have to. That night, before I went to bed, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool. The sky was beginning to darken. The willow branches moved in a slow, easy sway. On the railing lay the 2 matchsticks I had left there deliberately. I picked them up, one in each hand, then snapped them cleanly in half and dropped them into the trash. No more warnings, no more games. This was still my house. And I was still here. When the house finally fell silent that night, I sat by the window and watched the porch light steady itself against the dark. For the first time in a long while, I felt something in me settle. Not triumph, not relief, something quieter, something earned. Looking back now, I see that the knock on my door was never meant to break me. It was meant to wake me. It taught me that even in the later chapters of our lives, we are still capable of standing up, speaking out, and protecting the pieces of ourselves that no one else has the right to claim. If you've ever had someone underestimate you, if you've ever had to fight for the life you built, if you've ever discovered strength you didn't know you had, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your story. And if my journey meant something to you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little quiet courage today, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Sometimes the smallest light is enough to guide you through a long night. Thank you for sitting with me in mine.